She gave him 6 years. 6 years of silence, sacrifice, and absolute loyalty. And he repaid her with a diamond ring slipped onto another woman's finger in front of 500 witnesses. But the humiliation was only the surface wound. Beneath it lay something far darker: stolen millions, a dead father, and a secret Claire Bennett didn't even know she was carrying. Before the night was over, a stranger would lean close and whisper 4 words that would detonate everything she thought she understood about her own life. The betrayal is only the beginning. If this story already has your pulse running, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and let's see exactly how far this story travels. Now stay close, because part 1 starts here. The dress had cost Claire Bennett 4 months of careful saving, and she hated herself a little for that now. Standing in the bathroom of the Whitmore Grand's 32nd floor, gripping the marble edge of the sink with both hands and staring at a face she barely recognized. The gown was midnight blue, fitted at the waist, elegant without being showy. Ethan had told her once, in the early days, that she looked best in blue. She'd remembered. She'd always remembered everything he said. That was probably her first mistake. She ran cold water over her wrists and tried to slow her breathing. The event had barely started, cocktail hour still in full swing beyond those mahogany doors. And already something felt wrong in a way she couldn't name, a texture to the air. The way Ethan had greeted her at the entrance with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, a kiss on the cheek instead of the mouth, his hand steering her immediately toward a cluster of investors rather than staying by her side. He'd been distracted for weeks. She'd written it off as pressure. The company's fourth quarter projections, the new hospital contracts, the congressional fundraiser he'd been co-hosting with Senator Callaway. She told herself she was being paranoid. The bathroom door opened behind her and a woman she didn't know came in, early 40s, silk dress, the practiced composure of someone who attended events like this the way other people attended grocery runs. The woman glanced at Claire in the mirror, offered a polite nothing smile, and moved to the far sink. Claire dried her hands on the white linen towel, smoothed the front of her dress, and made herself walk back out. The Whitmore Grand's anniversary gala occupied the entirety of the hotel's crystal ballroom and the adjoining terrace, 12,000 square feet of chandelier light, white floral arrangements the size of small trees, and the kind of ambient wealth that pressed against your skin like humidity. Vencare Solutions had rented the space to celebrate its 10th year of operation, and Ethan had pulled out everything for it. There were senators here. There were hospital board members and hedge fund managers and at least 2 former cabinet secretaries. There were journalists. There were cameras positioned so subtly you almost didn't notice them. Claire accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server and drifted toward the edge of the room, scanning for Ethan. She found him near the center bar, laughing, relaxed, one hand in his jacket pocket, the other gesturing expansively at something the silver-haired man beside him had said. That was Ethan at his best. Command disguised as ease. He'd built Vencare from a single regional health management office into a multi-state network of patient services and insurance partnerships. And he did it by making every person in his orbit feel like the most important one in the room, right up until the moment they weren't. He'd done it to her for 6 years. She watched him across the ballroom and felt the familiar pull, the same thing that had kept her loyal through the long stretches of cancellations and rescheduled dinners, and the slow, steady subordination of her own career to the unspoken demands of being Ethan Vale's partner. She was a registered nurse, or she had been, before she'd taken the position managing patient outreach for Vencare's Eastern Division. It paid more. It meant more time near him. Those had seemed like good reasons at 26. At 32, standing at the rim of a party full of people who all seemed to know something she didn't, the math no longer felt as clean. Ethan glanced up and found her eyes across the room. For a half second, something moved across his face, a flicker of something she couldn't read, and then he turned back to his conversation without crossing toward her. Claire took a long sip of champagne and set the glass down on the nearest table. She moved through the crowd with the quiet efficiency she'd learned from years of hospital wards, reading the room, calculating space, keeping her face neutral. She stopped to speak with Karen Hu from the compliance office, exchanged pleasantries with Dr. Voss from the Harrington Network Board. She smiled at people she half recognized and accepted introductions from people she'd never met. She did all of it with a portion of her attention while the rest of it tracked Ethan, who was steadily working his way toward the small elevated platform at the far end of the ballroom where the evening's formal remarks would be delivered. It was 11 minutes past 9 when the lights dimmed slightly and Ethan stepped to the microphone. He looked beautiful up there. She'd always found that irritating and irresistible in equal measure. The easy authority of him, the way the room reorganized itself around his attention. He welcomed everyone. He spoke about Vencare's mission. He quoted some numbers that made the investors in the room lean forward almost imperceptibly. He thanked the senator. He thanked the board. He made a joke that landed exactly as well as he'd intended it to. Claire stood near the middle of the crowd, champagne in hand, watching him the way she'd watched him for 6 years. Patient, steady, proud of him in a way she'd never quite managed to voice. Then he said, "There's one more thing I want to do tonight." He stepped back from the podium. He reached into his jacket pocket, and Claire felt something cold drop through the center of her chest before her brain had even processed what was happening. Because she recognized the motion, the deliberateness of it, the way the room around her went sharp and still. But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Madison Hale, who was stepping forward from the front row with the specific grace of someone who had known this was coming, wearing a cream-colored gown and a smile that Claire would spend the next several weeks trying to scrub out of her memory. Madison Hale, Vencare's chief communications officer. Madison Hale, who had joined the company 14 months ago and whom Claire had considered, with some embarrassment now, a professional acquaintance. Ethan dropped to one knee. The room erupted. Claire did not move. She couldn't. The champagne glass was still in her hand and the sound around her went distant and the light felt wrong. Too bright, too diffused, like the way vision narrows right before you pass out. She was aware of the applause. She was aware of Madison pressing both hands to her mouth in a gesture of surprise that Claire recognized, even in that moment, as practiced. She was aware of Ethan sliding a ring onto Madison's finger and rising and kissing her in front of 500 people while cameras captured it all. She became aware very slowly that several people near her had turned to look at her. They knew. Some portion of this room, the ones who moved in Ethan's orbit, who had been to his dinners and his charity events and his weekend gatherings in the Hamptons, they knew who she was and what they were watching, and they were looking at her with the particular mixture of pity and discomfort that attaches to witnessing someone's private devastation in a public setting. Claire Bennett put her champagne glass down on the table beside her. She turned and walked toward the exit. She made it to the corridor outside the ballroom before her legs stopped cooperating in any reliable way, and she leaned against the wall and pressed her back flat against it and breathed through her mouth and stared at the ceiling. Her heart was doing something strange, not racing exactly, but heavy, like each beat required effort. The sound of the applause still filtered through the closed doors. She counted to 10. Then she pushed herself off the wall and kept walking. The corridor led past the coat check and the bank of elevators toward the hotel lobby. She was already calculating, car service, not a cab, because she couldn't trust herself to make small talk with a driver right now. She'd call from the lobby. She'd go home. She'd figure out the rest of it in the morning when she wasn't wearing 4 months of savings and standing in a place where 500 people had just watched her entire relationship get retroactively classified as something other than what she'd believed it was. Ms. Bennett. She stopped. The man standing near the elevators was someone she hadn't seen in years, and even then only in photographs. Dominic Moretti was 37 and built like someone who'd spent his 20s making sure people understood that negotiations had consequences. He was dark-eyed, broad-shouldered, and wearing a suit that suggested money without advertising it. He was also, if she was remembering correctly, the reason Ethan Vale had a company at all. The silent early backer who'd provided capital for Vencare's first 3 years before disappearing from public record around the time the company went legitimate. Disappeared from public record. That was how she'd always described it to herself. She'd been careful not to examine what that phrase implied. "I know who you are," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Then this is easier." He moved toward her. Not fast, not aggressive, but with the measured confidence of someone who never approached a situation without having calculated the geometry of it first. He stopped at a distance that was just barely professional. "You should leave. Not just tonight. Your apartment. The city if you can manage it, at least for a few weeks. Excuse me. I'm not trying to scare you." His voice was low and precise. "I'm telling you what's coming because no one else here is going to." Claire looked at him. She'd had a lot of practice reading men in positions of authority. Nurses developed it early, or they didn't last. And what she read in Dominic Moretti's face was not performance. There was something behind his eyes that she categorized cautiously as genuine urgency held under rigid control. "Why?" she said. "Because Ethan is looking for something." He glanced back toward the ballroom doors, then returned to her. "And he believes you have it. He's been looking for it for months. Tonight was partly—" He paused. Tonight served multiple purposes for him. The cold that had dropped through her chest at the proposal settled now into something more organized. Fear with structure. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I know." Something in his expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. "That's what makes this more dangerous, not less." "Why are you telling me this?" He held her gaze. "Because I owe someone a debt that this doesn't come close to repaying. But it's a start." He reached into his jacket and produced a plain business card with a single phone number, no name. "Don't use your regular phone. Buy a prepaid. Don't tell anyone you spoke to me." He held the card out. Claire looked at the card. She looked at his face. She thought about 6 years in a midnight blue dress and the specific sound of 500 people applauding something that broke her. She took the card. Dominic Moretti held her eyes for one more second, then turned and walked toward the stairwell without using the elevator, without looking back, and without making a sound that she could hear over the ambient noise of the corridor. Claire stood alone in the hallway and looked down at the card in her hand. Then she put it in her clutch and walked out of the Whitmore Grand into the November air sound. She didn't sleep. She sat in her apartment, the apartment she'd been in for 3 years, the one Ethan had helped her find in the East 50s, the one she now understood had been chosen for its proximity to his offices rather than her convenience. And she sat on the edge of her bed in the midnight blue dress, and she did not cry. She wanted to. The pressure of it sat behind her sternum like a stone. But the tears didn't come, and after a while she stopped waiting for them. What came instead was inventory. She began going through things the way she'd have gone through a patient's chart, methodical, without sentiment, looking for what was actually there rather than what she wanted to find. 6 years. She'd met Ethan through a colleague at the hospital where she'd been working, a mutual friend who'd since moved to Seattle. Within 8 months, she'd left the hospital and joined VenCare. Within a year, she'd let her apartment lease lapse and moved into one that was, in retrospect, significantly adjacent to his life rather than anchored in her own. She'd given up her nursing license's continuing education credits because the schedule made it impossible to keep up. She told herself she'd get back to it. She hadn't. She'd turned down a position at the Langston Medical Center's Patient Advocacy Division 3 years ago because Ethan had said the timing wasn't right for them, and she'd understood that to mean for the relationship. She thought about that now with a clarity that made her feel slightly sick. She went to her desk and opened her laptop and pulled up her employment contract with VenCare's Eastern Division. She read through it the way she probably should have read it when she'd signed it. Her role was titled Senior Patient Outreach Coordinator. Her access to patient financial records was logged and audited by the compliance department. Her continued employment was contingent on non-disclosure of proprietary company information. She'd signed an NDA 2 years ago as part of a routine contract renewal. She'd read it quickly. She'd trusted him. She pulled up her banking application and stared at her accounts for a long time. Then she made coffee and waited for morning. The email arrived at 7:14 a.m. It was from VenCare's HR department, automated in format, and it informed her that her access credentials to the company's patient outreach systems had been deactivated, effective immediately due to a restructuring of the Eastern Division's management framework. She was invited to contact HR to discuss her severance package and the return of company equipment. Claire read the email twice. She picked up her phone and called the HR director, a woman named Sandra Park, who had always been pleasant to her. The call went to voicemail. She left a measured message. She called Sandra's direct assistant. Voicemail. She called the main HR line. She was placed on hold for 11 minutes, and then a voice she didn't recognize told her that the matter was under review and she would be contacted within 5 to 7 business days. She hung up and sat very still in her kitchen. The restructuring email had been sent at 4:23 a.m. She thought about that timing. She thought about Dominic Moretti in the hotel corridor, the card in her clutch, the specific economy of his warning. He believes you have it. Tonight served multiple purposes. She went to her closet and found the filing box where she kept hard copies of work documents she'd brought home over the years, printouts of reports, patient outreach data she'd been reviewing, internal memos. She'd done it out of habit, the way she'd kept patient charts tidy on the ward. She hadn't thought anything of it. She pulled the box out and set it on her kitchen table. She'd just opened the lid when her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. "Don't access your work email again from your home network." Dominic's voice. No greeting. "They'll be monitoring it as of this morning. Use a public terminal if you need to retrieve anything." "I've already been locked out." A pause. "That was faster than I expected." "I was fired at 4 in the morning." "Not fired, restructured." The distinction in his voice suggested he found the euphemism unpleasant. "Claire, listen to me. In the next 48 hours, there are going to be additional moves. Your professional license may be flagged. I don't know the mechanism they're using, but there are people in Ethan's network with connections to the licensing board. Your mother, don't." The word came out hard and flat. "I'm not making a threat. I'm telling you what I know so you can move first." His voice was careful, patient in a way that felt practiced, like someone who'd learned to control the pace of difficult information through experience rather than temperament. "Does your mother still live in the house in Westchester?" Claire's hand tightened on the phone. "How do you know about my mother?" "I've been watching Ethan's operation for 2 years." A pause that felt weighted. "I know things I should have done more with sooner. That's a separate conversation. Right now I'm asking about your mother because she may be used as leverage." The stone behind Claire's sternum shifted. "Her name is Ruth. She has early-stage memory decline. She lives alone." Silence on the line for a moment. "Can you get her somewhere safe? A family member? A friend she trusts?" "My aunt in Connecticut." Claire was already thinking through logistics, hating that she was already thinking through logistics, hating that the situation had moved this quickly from the inside of a hotel bathroom to get your mother out of her house. "I need to understand what I'm actually dealing with here before I start moving people around." "I know." Another pause. "Can we meet?" "In person." "Somewhere you choose, somewhere public." "Why should I trust you?" "You probably shouldn't." His voice had an honesty to it that she hadn't expected. Not self-deprecation, more like statement of fact. "But I'm the only person who's come to you with information rather than a termination email, which means you have more reason to hear me out than not to." Claire looked at the filing box on her kitchen table. She thought about the document that had been printed and stuffed between a quarterly patient outreach report and a set of discharge coordination memos, a document she'd flagged 3 months ago as anomalous and set aside meaning to look at more carefully, then forgotten about in the way you forget about things when your life is organized around someone else's priorities. She pulled it out now. It was a spreadsheet printout, dense rows of patient account numbers, insurance billing codes, and payment routing information. She'd printed it because the billing codes hadn't matched the service categories in the way they should have, and she'd meant to ask the billing department. She'd never asked. The paper was slightly creased from sitting at the bottom of the box. "There's a document," she said, "printed. I found it in a file I brought home months ago. Billing data. The codes don't align." The silence on Dominic's end shifted quality. "Describe it." She described it. When she finished, the line was quiet for 4 seconds. "That's part of what he's looking for," Dominic said. "That specific routing format. Those account structures. That's how the extraction worked. Where the money came from and where it went." Another beat. "Claire, that document is evidence of a federal crime." She set the paper down on her kitchen table with careful, deliberate hands. "How federal?" she said. "Hundreds of millions of dollars." His voice was even. "Stolen from patient accounts. Elderly patients, primarily. People who couldn't track what was being moved because the fraud was embedded in layers of legitimate billing activity." A pause. "There are names attached to this that go beyond Ethan. Senator Calloway, 3 hospital board members, 2 investment firms. It's been running for at least 5 years." Claire stared at the printout, at the columns of patient account numbers, at the numbers that represented people who'd trusted the system with their most vulnerable financial information during the most medically vulnerable periods of their lives. She'd worked in patient care for 6 years before VenCare. She knew exactly what those account numbers represented. "How did you end up with knowledge of all this?" she said. A long pause this time. Because for the first 2 years of Vencare's operation, I was part of it. His voice didn't change in texture or pace, just delivered the fact with the flatness of someone who'd made a decision not to soften it. I provided capital, structure, and certain connections that made the early infrastructure of the fraud possible. I didn't know then what the money was ultimately going to be used for. By the time I understood, I was already in deep enough that extraction wasn't simple. And yet here you are, Claire said. Extracted. Trying to be. Another pause. What I'm telling you is that I have no clean hands in this. I'm not coming to you as someone who has the right to ask for your trust. I'm coming to you because what Ethan built, what it's doing to people, has to stop. And you are currently the only person outside of his circle who has a piece of evidence he can't reconstruct or suppress. Claire looked at the printout again. She thought about the patients. She thought about her father, David Bennett, who'd spent the last 2 years of his life navigating a medical billing system he couldn't understand, who'd called her frustrated and confused about charges that didn't seem right, about money that seemed to disappear between his insurance provider and his care facility. Her father, who had died 14 months ago of cardiac arrest at 67, leaving Claire with an estate that consisted almost entirely of debt she was still quietly paying down. Something cold and very specific moved through her. My father, she said. He was a patient in the Vencare network. Dominic said nothing for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful in a way it hadn't been before. I know. Was he... She stopped. Her jaw tightened. Was he one of them? Was his account... We need to have that conversation in person. His tone left no ambiguity about what that meant. Choose a place. I'll be there. Claire stood in her kitchen in the morning light with a document that could send powerful men to prison and the slowly forming understanding that the man she'd loved for 6 years might have stolen from her dying father. She named a coffee shop in Midtown. She hung up. Then she called her aunt in Connecticut and told her she needed a favor. She met Dominic at a corner table in the back of a place called Brennan's, a no-frills diner on 44th that stayed busy enough to make quiet conversation invisible, but wasn't the kind of place where anyone from Ethan's world would eat. She arrived 10 minutes early and positioned herself with her back to the wall and a clear sightline to the entrance, which she recognized as the kind of defensive geometry she'd absorbed from somewhere without ever consciously learning it. He came in exactly on time, ordered a black coffee at the counter without consulting a menu, and moved to her table with the same measured economy she'd noticed the night before. He sat across from her and looked at her directly, without the performance of pleasantries. She'd brought the printout in a plain manila envelope. She kept it on the table between them. Tell me about my father, she said. He didn't deflect. She gave him credit for that. David Bennett, patient ID in the Vencare Long-Term Care Coordination Network. His account showed standard billing activity at the surface level. Insurance coordination, care facility payments, prescription management. Below that level, over a period of approximately 19 months, a series of microtransfers were routed through his account as a pass-through vehicle. Small amounts individually. Collectively, he paused. Approximately $43,000 that moved through patient accounts like his was never visible in standard audits because the amounts per transaction were below automated review thresholds. Claire sat very still. He called me. Multiple times. He said the bills didn't look right. Dominic's jaw moved, just slightly. I know. He thought he was confused. I thought it was him, that he didn't understand the billing well enough. Her voice was flat and very controlled. He apologized to me for not understanding it better. He was embarrassed. A 67-year-old man was embarrassed that he couldn't track what someone was doing to his account. Dominic said nothing. He held her gaze and he didn't look away, and he didn't offer condolences, and she was grateful for that, because she could feel the grief moving through her chest like something structural shifting, and condolences would have cracked it open in a way she couldn't afford right now. Did Ethan know it was my father's account? She said. Patient accounts were selected algorithmically. He wouldn't have known individual names. A pause. But he knew the demographic. Elderly patients with complex billing histories who were unlikely to successfully dispute charges. And you. Her voice stayed flat. When you were part of this, you knew the demographic. He held the hit without flinching. Yes. She looked at the envelope on the table between them. She thought about the shape of the next several weeks. the choices she could make, the paths that led somewhere versus the ones that folded back in on themselves. "Tell me everything," she said. "All of it. What Ethan has, what he's looking for, who's involved, and what I'd need to do to end it." Dominic looked at her across the table for a moment. Something in his expression that she couldn't entirely name, respect, maybe, or the recognition of something he hadn't expected. Then he started talking. He talked for 2 hours. The framework had been elegant, Claire had to admit, which was not the same as admiring it, but it helped to understand the architecture of something before you figured out how to take it apart. Vencare's legitimate operations were real. The company genuinely provided health management coordination services to hospitals and care facilities across 7 states. The fraud was embedded inside the legitimate infrastructure, the way art works inside wood. Invisible at the surface, structural at the core. Patient financial accounts were enrolled in Vencare's proprietary billing management system as part of standard care coordination agreements. The system was marketed as a convenience, one interface for patients to track all billing activity across multiple providers. What it also did, through a series of shell company structures and automated routing protocols, was extract small sums from patient accounts that were logged internally as administrative coordination fees, categorized in ways that buried them in routine billing noise, and channeled through 3 intermediary companies, all nominally independent, all with legitimate business registrations, before landing in accounts connected to a private investment vehicle managed by an entity called Meridian Capital Advisory. Meridian Capital Advisory had 3 named principals, all of whom were lawyers or investment managers with no visible connection to Vencare. Its actual beneficial ownership structure pointed, through 2 additional layers of corporate entity, to Ethan Vale. The political piece came in through Senator Callaway's campaign finance infrastructure. A portion of the extracted funds was cycled through Meridian into a series of political action committees and dark money vehicles connected to Callaway's national profile. In exchange, Callaway's office had, over the past 4 years, quietly ensured that certain healthcare billing reform proposals never made it out of committee, that specific regulatory changes to patient account management never received support, and that Vencare's federal contract bids received expedited review. 2 hospital board members in the network had received direct payments from subsidiary entities, logged as consulting fees. The total extracted from patient accounts over 5 years was, by Dominic's estimate, somewhere between $200 and $250 million. Claire sat with that number for a moment. "The document I have," she said, tapping the envelope. "Where does it fit?" "It's a routing record." He leaned forward slightly. "A printout from Vencare's internal transfer reconciliation system. Not the version that goes to outside auditors, the internal one. It shows the actual account movement paths, account numbers, routing codes, timestamps. It connects the patient accounts directly to the shell company transfer chain." He paused. "The internal version of that record was deleted from Vencare's servers 8 months ago. Ethan had the IT department run a comprehensive purge after an internal compliance review got too close, but the purge only affected digital records. I printed it before the purge. Without knowing that's what you were doing." She thought about the moment she'd pulled it off the printer, a late evening, distracted, meaning to look at it properly later, filing it in her home box because she was thorough about documentation even when she didn't know what she was documenting. "Why hasn't anyone gone to federal investigators with what you already know?" she said. "Because what I know is testimony from someone with my background." His voice was measured. "I was Ethan's original backer. I provided infrastructure for a fraudulent enterprise in its early stages. My testimony alone would be challenged and likely destroyed in court. What you have is a documentary record, physical evidence from inside the system, printed before the purge, with metadata and document properties that can be forensically dated." He met her eyes. "It's the difference between allegation and proof." Claire looked at the envelope. "You understand that if Ethan finds out you have this," she started, "he already suspects you might. The search of your work files in the last 72 hours was systematic. When they didn't find it digitally, they concluded either you deleted it without understanding its significance or you had a physical copy somewhere." A pause. "The termination this morning was partly operational, getting you out of the building, but it was also partly designed to rattle you into making a move, contacting someone, trying to sell it, anything that would expose where it was." "Rattling worked," Claire said. I'm having breakfast with someone who used to launder money for him. Something happened at the corner of Dominic Moretti's mouth. Not quite a smile, more the ghost of one. For what it's worth. I haven't laundered money in over 3 years. Congratulations. She pulled the envelope off the table and set it on her lap. Here's what I need from you. I need to understand the full scope of what happened to my father's account. I need a forensic accountant I can trust who isn't connected to anyone in this network. I need to know the names of every entity in this chain, every shell company, every intermediary, and I need you to tell me who you've spoken to at the federal level and what you've told them. Dominic studied her. And in exchange? I haven't decided yet what I'm doing with this document, but I can tell you that whatever I decide, I'm going to make sure the right people see it through the right channels, because those aren't my father's account numbers. Those are people who trusted the system that was stealing from them. She held his gaze. I don't need you to do anything except be useful and be honest. If you stop being either one of those things, I'll go directly to a federal prosecutor with what I have, and you can explain your own history on your own terms. The ghost of something moved across his face again, more definite this time. Not a smile exactly, something more interior than that. Fair, he said. Good. She stood. I'm going to go find somewhere else to stay tonight. I'll reach out through the number you gave me. She picked up her bag. One more question. Yes? Why did you say last night that you owed someone a debt? He was quiet for a moment. He looked at his coffee cup and then back at her. Your father called Vencare's patient services line 14 months ago, the month before he died. He'd been trying to get his billing records clarified for weeks. He was told twice that it wasn't possible. The third call, he reached someone who actually listened. A pause. That person was me. It was one of the last times I was still nominally inside the company's advisory structure. He explained what he'd noticed, the charges that didn't make sense. He was articulate and patient, and very clear that he wasn't looking to make trouble. He just wanted to understand what had happened to his money. Dominic's voice didn't change in pace or texture, but something underneath it shifted almost imperceptibly. I told him I would look into it. I didn't. I was in the middle of my own extraction from the structure, and I made a calculation. He stopped. He died 3 weeks later. Claire stood with her bag over her shoulder in the back of a 44th Street diner and absorbed that. He was kind, she said finally. Her voice was very quiet. He was the kind of person who apologized for taking up your time when he was the one being wronged. I know. His voice was low. That's why I was at the Whitmore last night. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked toward the door because the grief was moving again, and she needed to be somewhere she could let it. The voicemail from the nursing licensing board arrived at 2:47 p.m. It was a recorded notification informing her that a formal complaint had been filed against her license regarding alleged falsification of patient records during her tenure at Vencare's Eastern Division, and that her license would be placed in provisional status pending investigation. She was invited to contact the board's disciplinary office to discuss the process. She listened to the message standing on a street corner in Murray Hill, outside the extended stay hotel where she'd just paid 3 nights in advance in cash. She listened to it a second time. Then she put her phone in her pocket and she walked into the hotel and took the elevator to the 4th floor and went into her room and sat on the bed. She sat there for a long time. She thought about the years she'd spent on the ward, the night shifts, the difficult patients, the paperwork, and the noise, and the specific satisfaction of understanding exactly what a person needed when they were too scared or too sick to ask for it directly. She'd been good at it. She'd loved it in the particular way you love things that are hard and that ask something real of you. She thought about her father. She thought about the last conversation she'd had with him. A Sunday call, routine, him asking about her work and her gently redirecting because she hadn't wanted to explain that her work was increasingly indistinguishable from managing Ethan Vale's professional life rather than doing something of her own. She thought about how she'd said everything's fine and meant it, and been wrong in a way that hadn't registered until it was too late to tell him the truth. She took the card Dominic had given her out of her wallet and looked at it. She picked up the prepaid phone she'd bought that morning. She dialed. He answered on the second ring. The licensing board, she said, they've already filed something. I know, I was going to tell you. His voice was quiet. I'm sorry. That was faster than I expected them to move. What's the mechanism? Someone in Ethan's network with access to the board's complaint intake process. The complaint will reference patient records from VenCare, records you didn't falsify, but records that were altered in the system after your access credentials were used. They logged into the system under your ID after they pulled your credentials last night. Her jaw tightened. They set me up. Retroactively. A pause. It's aggressive, which means they're more worried about that document than I thought. Claire stared at the wall of the hotel room. Generic art, beige carpet, the particular impersonality of temporary spaces. Dominic. She said his name carefully, testing the weight of it. When this is over, and it's going to be over because I'm going to make sure it is, you're going to have to answer for your own part in this. I know. I'm not talking about testimony. I mean legally, formally. A pause. I know. And you're still here. Yes. His voice was steady. I'm still here. Claire held the phone and thought about the document in the manila envelope sitting in her bag. She thought about the forensic accountant she needed to find, the attorney she needed to consult, the federal investigators she needed to reach through channels that Ethan's network couldn't monitor. She thought about the specific, organized anger that was now living in her chest where the grief had been, cleaner than grief, sharper, something she could work with. She thought about her father's voice on the phone saying, I probably just don't understand it about money that someone was stealing from him in amounts designed to be invisible. I need a forensic accountant by tomorrow, she said. Someone completely outside this network. Can you do that? Yes. And I need the full corporate registry for every entity in the shell company chain, every name, every address, every filing date. I can have that within 24 hours. Good. She took a breath. Then we start. The silence on the line held for just a moment before Dominic said quietly, Claire, there's one more thing you need to know before we go further. She went still. Ethan's mother, he said, Eleanor Vale. She's been living in a private care facility in Connecticut for the past 3 years. Dementia. Severe. A pause. Before the dementia progressed to the point where she lost capacity, she kept records. Personal records. Handwritten. Covering the early years of the company, including the period before the fraud structure was formalized, including conversations she witnessed between Ethan and the people who built it with him. Claire said nothing. Those records, Dominic said, are somewhere in her room at the facility. Ethan knows they exist. He's been trying to get access to them for over a year, but the facility has his mother's healthcare proxy assigned to an independent attorney she appointed before her decline, someone Ethan can't pressure. He's been blocked at every attempt. A pause. But there's nothing blocking you. Why would I have access? Because Eleanor Vale asked for you. His voice was careful. By name, 8 months ago, before her capacity deteriorated to its current state. She left a note with the facility that if Claire Bennett ever came to visit, she was to be allowed in. The staff have it on file. The room was very quiet. She knew about me, Claire said. She knew what her son was doing to you. A pause waited with something complex. She was trying to leave a door open. Claire sat in the hotel room in Murray Hill with a prepaid phone pressed against her ear, and the shape of what she was walking into became, in that moment, fully visible. Not just Ethan's crimes, not just the financial network, the personal betrayals layered underneath, the things an old woman in a care facility had tried to preserve because she couldn't stop what her son had built. But she could, maybe, leave something behind for the person she knew would eventually need it. Connecticut, Claire said. What facility? And that was the moment Claire Bennett stopped surviving what had been done to her and started deciding what she was going to do about it. The Meadowbrook Memory Care Facility sat at the end of a long gravel drive in Fairfield County, Connecticut, surrounded by the kind of manicured stillness that costs a significant amount of money to maintain. Old oaks, trimmed hedges, a flagstone path leading to double-glass doors that reflected the gray November sky back at Claire as she walked toward them with her bag on her shoulder and the manila envelope tucked inside it, and 3 days of almost no sleep sitting behind her eyes like grit. She'd taken the train from Grand Central, cash ticket, paid at the window, no app. Dominic's suggestion, delivered without explanation, and she'd followed it without asking because she was learning, faster than she'd have liked, to trust the instincts of someone who'd spent years being careful about being found. The facility's front desk was staffed by a woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the particular brand of professional warmth that care facilities cultivate in their public-facing staff, genuine enough to be comforting, practiced enough to hold under pressure. Her name tag read Patricia. "I'm here to see Eleanor Vale," Claire said. "My name is Claire Bennett." Patricia's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted, a slight settling, like someone who'd been expecting a particular name and was now hearing it. She reached below the desk and produced a binder, flipped it open, and ran her finger down a page. "Ms. Bennett." She looked up. Mrs. Vale left standing instructions. "You're on the approved visitors list." A pause. "I should let you know that Mrs. Vale's condition has declined significantly in recent months. She has periods of clarity, but they're shorter than they used to be and less predictable. Today has been a moderate day." "I understand," Claire said. "Thank you." Patricia led her down a corridor that smelled of something clean and faintly floral. Not antiseptic, the facility was too expensive for institutional antiseptic, and stopped outside a room near the end of the hall. She knocked twice, gently, and opened the door. Eleanor Vale was 71 years old and looked, in the pale light coming through the window, like someone who had once been formidable and still carried the architecture of it, even as the substance declined. She was sitting in a chair by the window in a wool cardigan, her white hair pinned neatly, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes, when she looked up, were gray and very clear. "You came," Eleanor said. The clarity in her voice hit Claire somewhere unexpected. She'd been braced for confusion, for the fractured half-recognition she'd seen in patients with memory decline. But this woman was present, completely, in this moment, and looking at Claire with an expression of complicated relief. "I came," Claire said. Patricia withdrew and closed the door quietly behind her. Claire pulled a chair close and sat. She didn't reach for her bag, didn't produce the envelope, didn't start with anything strategic. She just sat across from an old woman who had asked for her by name and waited. "You look tired," Eleanor said. "I am tired." "That's honest." A pause. Eleanor's hands moved slightly in her lap, a small, unconscious adjustment. "I've been waiting for you. I wasn't sure how long I had left." The kind of waiting where you can't guarantee your own availability. Her mouth moved in something that held the remnant of a dry humor. "How much do you know?" "More than I did 3 days ago. Not everything." "What do you know about my son?" Claire held the old woman's gaze. "I know what he built. I know what it did to people. I know he's been looking for records." Eleanor nodded, slowly. "He came here 6 months ago, Ethan. He sat in that same chair with flowers he'd bought at the airport, and he talked to me for 40 minutes about how much he missed me and how the company was doing and how he wished I could come to New York more often." A pause. "Then he asked me about my notebooks." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I didn't know what he was talking about." Her eyes were steady. "I've been telling the doctors here that my decline is more severe than it is. Not completely. I'm not well, Claire. Don't misunderstand me. But I have more clarity than I allow them to document. It buys me time." She looked toward the window. "He would have had them taken if he'd known where they were." "Where are they?" Eleanor reached into the pocket of her cardigan and produced a small brass key. Old-fashioned, the kind that opened a lockbox rather than a door. "There's a storage unit in Bridgeport. The number is taped to the inside of the key's bow." She held it out. 12 notebooks, covering the first 4 years of Vencare's operation. I attended every significant meeting. Ethan included me in the early period because he wanted my legitimacy. I had connections in the healthcare board world that he needed. He stopped including me when the structure became what it became. Her hand, holding out the key, was steady. "But I'd already been listening for 2 years by then." Claire took the key. The metal was warm from Eleanor's pocket. "Why didn't you go to investigators yourself?" "Because I'm his mother." The words were simple and they carried something enormous and unsentimental behind them. "And because I was complicit in the early period, in the ways that mothers are complicit when they provide legitimacy to things they should question. I introduced him to people. I vouched for him. I thought I was watching ambition." A pause. "By the time I understood what I was actually watching, I was old and my mind was beginning to go, and I didn't know who to trust." She looked back at Claire. "But I knew about you. I watched what he did to you over 6 years. The way he used your loyalty and your patience and your competence and gave you nothing that was actually yours. Her voice was even. You were the person I trusted. I didn't know how to reach you. Claire looked at the key in her palm. 12 notebooks. 4 years of documentation from inside the room where it was built. His father, Claire said quietly. What happened to him? Something moved behind Eleanor's eyes. Martin Vale died of a heart attack 11 years ago. He was 58. A long pause. He'd been fighting Ethan about the direction of the company for 6 months before he died. They had a meeting the week before Martin's cardiac event. About money Martin had found that wasn't where it should be. She stopped. I've never been able to prove anything, but I've thought about it every day since. The room was very quiet. Claire closed her fingers around the key. Yeah. She called Dominic from the parking lot of a gas station a mile from the facility, using the prepaid. I have a key, she said when he answered. Storage unit in Bridgeport. 12 notebooks from Eleanor Vale, 4 years of documentation. The silence on his end lasted 2 full seconds. That changes the shape of everything. I know. Claire. He stopped, started again. The notebooks, combined with the routing document you have, combined with what I can provide as testimony, that's a prosecutable case, not a strong allegation, an actual case. I know. She looked out at the gray afternoon. We need the forensic accountant first. Before I go to the storage unit, before anything is moved, I want a forensic accountant to be present when I open those notebooks. So there's a documented chain of custody from the moment they leave the unit. A pause. That's exactly right. Give me until tomorrow morning. And Dominic, she paused. Eleanor suggested that Ethan's father may not have died of natural causes. The silence this time was different in texture, heavier. I've had the same thought, he said. I don't have evidence, but the timing of Martin Vale's death and what Martin had found, yes, I've had the same thought. She hung up and sat in the car for a while, watching the traffic on the state road, feeling the brass key in her jacket pocket. Then she drove back toward the city. The forensic accountant's name was Vera Shin, and she'd spent 12 years working financial crimes cases for the U.S. Attorney's Office before going private. Dominic had reached her through a mutual contact he'd declined to specify, and Claire had spent 40 minutes on the phone with her the following morning conducting what amounted to a mutual interview. Claire assessing whether Vera could be trusted, Vera assessing whether the case had the structural integrity to justify her involvement. They met at Vera's office in a building on Lexington Avenue that was deliberately unremarkable. No lobby signage, no listed tenants, the kind of office that financial crimes work sometimes necessitated. Vera was 53, Korean-American, with close-cropped hair and the manner of someone who had processed a significant amount of human dishonesty and was no longer surprised by any particular form of it. Claire laid the routing document on the table. Vera put on reading glasses and looked at it for a long time without touching it. This is a pre-purge transfer reconciliation record, she said. Yes. Where did you get it? I printed it 7 months ago from VenCare's internal network. I was Senior Patient Outreach Coordinator for the Eastern Division. I had network access. Vera looked up over her glasses. Did you know what you were printing? I knew the billing codes were anomalous. I didn't understand the structure. Claire held her gaze. I printed it meaning to ask questions. I filed it and forgot about it. Vera looked back at the document. The metadata on this printout, if this was printed from the internal network on that date, before the system purge, it was. The print log would still exist somewhere in the physical infrastructure of the office's print servers. Those weren't part of the digital purge protocol. Vera took her glasses off and held them. She was thinking in a particular way. Claire recognized it as the look of someone running implications forward and back simultaneously. You understand that the moment you take that storage unit in Bridgeport, you need to be prepared for immediate escalation. There's no controlled timeline. Once the notebooks are in evidence, things will move fast. I understand. And the source of the notebooks, Eleanor Vale. What's her mental capacity status legally? Declining. But she had full legal capacity when she created the materials and when she designated the attorney-held healthcare proxy. The notebooks predate any diagnosed decline by years. Vera tapped her glasses against her palm. I'm going to need you to understand something before we go further. I do this work because financial crimes against vulnerable people are some of the most corrosive things that happen in a society, and almost nobody cares about them the way they should. She looked at Claire directly. But I need to know that you're coming to me with the actual intention of bringing this to federal investigators, not as leverage, not as a negotiating position with Ethan Vale. The moment evidence becomes leverage, I can't be involved. Leverage, Claire said, implies I want something from Ethan Vale. Vera studied her. I want him in a federal courtroom, Claire said. That's the only thing I want. A moment passed. Then Vera put her glasses back on and pulled a legal pad from her desk drawer. Walk me through everything you know about the transfer structure. Oh, they were 40 minutes into Claire's account of what Dominic had told her when Claire's personal phone buzzed on the edge of Vera's desk where she'd set it face up out of habit. The name on the screen was Ethan. She looked at it. Vera looked at it. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Claire picked it up and answered it. Claire. His voice was the same as it had always been. Smooth, calibrated, the particular frequency of a man who'd spent a decade in rooms where tone was currency. I think we should talk. Okay, she said. A pause. He hadn't expected that. I know last night was... The way things happened was not how I wanted. Ethan. She kept her voice completely even. What do you want? Another pause, shorter this time. He recalibrated. I want to see you in person. There are things I should explain to you. You can say whatever you want to say right now. Some things are better face to face. Some things, Claire said, you want to do face to face because you want to watch my reaction. She let that sit for a beat. What is it you think I have that you want back? The silence this time had a different quality, sharper. The pretense of the call dropped a layer. I don't know what you're referring to. Then you called to explain the proposal. Explain it. Claire, how long were you seeing Madison before last week? A breath. That's complicated. Is it? She watched Vera across the desk, who had stopped writing and was listening with the flat attention of someone recording every word. Ethan, you fired me at 4 a.m. and had someone file a false complaint with the nursing board the same day. That's not complicated. That's deliberate. The restructuring was a business decision that had nothing to do with... The complaint to the licensing board was filed using my access credentials to attach falsified records to my name. Someone logged into the system under my ID after my credentials were pulled. I'd like you to explain that as a business decision. The silence stretched. When he spoke again, the smoothness was still there, but something underneath it had changed. A pressure, like a hand tightening. You're upset. I understand that. But you're reading things into... I'm going to stop you, Claire said, because I don't want to listen to this version of the conversation. I've been listening to versions of this conversation for 6 years, and I'm done. She paused. If you want to talk to my attorney. She hung up. Vera was looking at her. Do you have an attorney? Not yet. You need one by end of day. Vera pulled a second business card from her drawer and slid it across the desk. Ellen Marsh, she handles federal whistleblower cases. She's done 2 healthcare fraud cases in the last 4 years. She doesn't represent anyone with any connection to Vencare or Callaway's network. I checked before I agreed to this meeting. Claire picked up the card. You were already ahead of me. I've done this before. Vera looked back at her legal pad. He's going to call back. And when he does, it'll be a different kind of call. She was right. The second call came 40 minutes later, while Claire was in a cab heading toward the attorney's office on Park Avenue South. She didn't recognize the number, but she answered. Ms. Bennett. Not Ethan's voice. A man she didn't know, professional, clipped. My name is Richard Hoyle. I'm General Counsel for Vencare Solutions. I'm calling regarding the nursing board complaint filed against your license. I'm listening. Vencare is prepared to withdraw the internal documentation that triggered the complaint, effective immediately, in exchange for a brief conversation with Mr. Vale about certain company property that may have been inadvertently removed from Vencare systems during your tenure. Claire watched the city move past the cab window. Company property. Printed documentation that belongs to Vencare's proprietary network. Its possession outside company systems is a potential violation of your non-disclosure agreement. Is this a legal threat? It's an offer. His voice smoothed over the edge of the question. Mr. Vale is also prepared to discuss fair compensation for the disruption to your employment and a letter of professional reference that would address any complications with your nursing license going forward. Claire thought about Vera's words. The moment evidence becomes leverage, I can't be involved. She thought about Ethan's voice 40 minutes ago pretending to be hurt. She thought about her father apologizing for not understanding the bills. I'll have my attorney contact you, she said, and hung up. What? Ellen Marsh was 50, precise, and had the energy of someone who had turned a significant amount of professional outrage into technical expertise. She sat across from Claire in a conference room with a window overlooking Park Avenue South and listened to the full account without interrupting, taking notes in a handwriting that was rapid and very small. When Claire finished, Marsh set her pen down and looked at her. The routing document and the notebooks constitute potential evidence in a federal investigation, Marsh said. You are a potential federal whistleblower under the False Claims Act, assuming Vencare held any federal contracts or received any federal funds. Their network includes facilities that receive Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements. Then you're covered. Marsh's voice was even and certain. Here's what happens now. I file a notice with Vencare's legal team that all communications go through me. That stops the calls. I also send a preservation letter to Vencare, which legally obligates them to preserve all relevant documentation, which makes any further destruction of evidence obstruction. She picked up her pen again. The Bridgeport storage unit. You need to go there with the forensic accountant and with a documented chain of custody protocol before you do anything else. Once the notebooks are secured and cataloged, I'll be reaching out to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division directly. Not the U.S. Attorney's Office? FBI first. They can coordinate with the U.S. Attorney. But given that Senator Callaway is implicated, I want the investigation to start at a level where political pressure is harder to apply. A pause. I'm also going to need a full account of what Dominic Moretti has told you and what his role in all of this is. I was an early structural participant in the fraud. He's prepared to cooperate. He's willing to accept legal consequences. Marsh looked at her steadily. Willing and doing are different things. I know. Claire held her gaze. He knows that too. A pause. You trust him. I trust that he has reasons to be honest with me that are more powerful than his reasons to protect himself. She paused. That's not the same as trust, but it's enough to work with. Marsh studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. I'll make the call to the FBI tomorrow morning. We move on Bridgeport first. Bridgeport, Connecticut, a storage facility off Route 1, the kind that operated on access codes and didn't ask questions. Claire went with Vera Shin and a documentation specialist. Vera brought a quiet man named Paul, who carried a camera and handled the chain of custody forms with the deliberate care of someone who understood that improperly documented evidence was almost as damaging as no evidence. The unit was 10 by 10. A single shelf unit on the back wall held a sealed banker's box, labeled in a handwriting Claire recognized from a birthday card she'd received years ago. Graceful, slightly formal. Eleanor's handwriting. Paul documented the sealed condition. Vera photographed the box from every angle before touching it. Claire signed the chain of custody form as the individual with authorizing access. Paul cut the packing tape. Inside the box, 12 composition notebooks. Eleanor Vale's handwriting. Dates running from the first month of Vencare's incorporation through the company's 4th year of operation. Vera put on gloves and opened the first notebook. She read for 3 minutes in complete silence. Then she looked up at Claire. There are names in here, she said. Specific names, dates, conversation summaries. Her voice was very controlled. Claire, in the 3rd entry of this notebook, Eleanor Vale describes a meeting at which the patient account extraction mechanism was formally proposed. She names the people in the room. A pause. Senator Callaway was in that meeting. Claire stood in the storage unit in the November cold and looked at 12 notebooks that an old woman had kept and hidden and protected for years, waiting for someone she trusted to come looking. Document everything, Claire said. All 12. Every page. She got back to the city at 8 in the evening. She sat in her hotel room and ate takeout she didn't taste and stared at the wall and tried to process the specific weight of the day. The key Eleanor had pressed into her hand. 12 notebooks. A man named Paul carefully photographing page after page while Vera made notes in her rapid small handwriting. Her phone buzzed. Dominic. How did it go? 12 notebooks, she said. Callaway was in the room when they designed the extraction mechanism. Silence for a beat. That's enough. That, combined with your document and my testimony, that's a prosecution. My attorney contacts the FBI tomorrow morning. She heard something in the quality of his silence. Not hesitation, more like someone absorbing the permanent nature of a thing. Okay, he said. Dominic. She paused. Are you ready for what this means for you? I've been getting ready for 3 years. His voice was quiet and without self-pity. I just needed a reason that was bigger than self-preservation. She thought about what Eleanor had said. You were the person I trusted. She thought about her father on the phone saying he probably just didn't understand the billing. There's something else, Dominic said. I need to tell you now because tomorrow things start moving and there won't be a clean moment. A pause. I've had someone monitoring Ethan's communications, not officially, old network capability that I've been using to track the scope of what he was doing. He stopped. This morning, Ethan had a call with 2 people. One of them I know. He's the kind of person who solves operational problems that are difficult to solve through legal channels. A beat. He's not a lawyer. Claire went still. Are you telling me Ethan is considering having someone hurt me? I'm telling you Ethan is past the point where he's thinking about this as a business problem. Dominic's voice was careful and precise. He's moved into a different category of response. The cold that moved through her was clean and specific. Not panic. She noticed that about herself. It wasn't panic. It was something more organized, a recalibration. Do you know where I'm staying? She said. No, and I haven't tried to find out. How do I know that? A pause. You don't. But if I wanted to know where you were staying, I wouldn't be warning you to change locations. She thought about that. It held. I'll move tonight, she said. New hotel. I'll let Marsh know the new address. Claire. A pause waited with something she couldn't entirely categorize. Be careful. Not careful in the way that makes you cautious about moving forward. Keep moving forward. Just be careful about how you move. She hung up. She sat for a moment in the hotel room she was about to leave. Then she packed her bag. It didn't take long. She'd been living out of it for 3 days. And she went to the desk and she pulled out the manila envelope with the routing document inside and she looked at it. She thought about the man Ethan had called, the kind that solved operational problems through non-legal channels. She thought about 12 notebooks in a secured chain of custody in Verishin's office. She thought about her father. She zipped her bag closed. She was in the lobby, bag over her shoulder, heading for the exit, when the door to the hotel bar opened and a man she didn't know stepped into her path, broad, standing slightly too deliberately in the space between her and the street entrance, in the way that people stand when they're positioned, rather than moving. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. He looked at her with an expression of flat professional assessment. Claire's heart did exactly 1 hard beat. She turned without pausing and walked toward the hotel's side exit, the one that led to the parking structure on the adjacent street, her footsteps even and her breathing controlled and the bag tight on her shoulder, and she did not look back, and she did not run. And she understood with absolute clarity, in that moment, that Dominic's warning had arrived approximately 6 hours too late, because Ethan Vale already knew where she was staying, which meant the careful, measured approach she'd been building toward a federal case had just collided with a timeline that was no longer hers to control. She went through the parking structure at a pace that wasn't quite running, controlled, deliberate, the kind of speed that doesn't draw attention in a hotel corridor, but covers ground. The structure smelled of exhaust and cold concrete and the particular staleness of enclosed spaces. She took the stairs, not the elevator. 3rd floor to ground level. Her bag bounced against her hip with each step, and the manila envelope inside it felt like it had tripled in weight. She came out on the side street and turned left without thinking. Left was away from the hotel's main entrance, away from wherever the man in the lobby might be positioning himself, and walked 2 blocks before she allowed herself to look back. Nothing obvious. A cab. A couple arguing quietly outside a restaurant. The ordinary texture of a city night. She ducked into a Walgreens, went to the back of the store near the pharmacy counter, and pulled out the prepaid phone. Dominic answered in 1 ring. There was someone in the hotel lobby, she said. Her voice was low and even. Positioned between me and the exit. I went out the side. A beat of silence. Where are you now? 2 blocks east. A drugstore. Stay inside. Don't go back to the hotel. I'll arrange somewhere for tonight. Another beat. Are you okay? The question landed in a way she hadn't expected. Direct, no cushion around it, just the actual question. She took a breath and checked herself the way she'd learned to check patience, starting from the outside and working in. Yes, she said. I'm going to send someone. A car. Female driver. She'll identify herself as Yolanda. 10 minutes. Someone from where? Someone I trust. A pause. That's going to have to be enough for tonight. She stood in the back of the drugstore for 9 minutes, looking at the shelves of vitamins without seeing them, running the geometry of the past 12 hours through her mind. Ethan had known which hotel she was in. She'd chosen it herself, paid cash, told no one except Ellen Marsh. She trusted Marsh. She was going to have to trust Marsh. But the fact of Ethan knowing meant either Marsh had been compromised or Claire had been tracked by methods she hadn't accounted for. The cab. The cab she'd taken from the storage facility in Bridgeport back to the city. She'd paid cash, but she'd used her personal phone to check the route once during the ride. Once was enough. She should have known better. She knew it even as she thought it and pushed the self-recrimination aside because it wasn't useful right now. A gray sedan pulled up outside the drugstore at the 9-minute mark. The driver was a compact woman in her 40s with close-cropped natural hair who rolled down the window and said simply, "Yolanda, get in." Claire got in. They drove in silence for 4 minutes before Yolanda said anything. "There's a phone in the glove box. New number. Dominic said to use it from now on, discard the prepaid." Claire opened the glove box, found the phone, and held it. "Where are we going?" she said. "Somewhere quiet. 30 minutes. Claire looked out the window at the city moving past and thought about Ellen Marsh, and whether she needed to call her tonight or whether the call could wait until morning. She thought about Vera Shin's office, where 12 notebooks were currently secured in a locked evidence cabinet. She thought about the FBI contact that Marsh had said she'd call in the morning. Morning felt very far away. Whoa. The apartment Yolanda took her to was in Astoria, a third-floor walk-up above a hardware store, clean and sparse, with the particular blankness of a space that was maintained as accommodation rather than lived in. 2 rooms, a bathroom, a window facing the back of the building. Dominic was there. He was standing at the kitchen counter with his jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, 2 cups of coffee that he'd already made, which meant he'd been there long enough to run the kettle. He looked at her when she came in with the specific look of someone who is assessing for damage and trying not to be obvious about it. "Sit," he said. Not an order. More like an offering. She sat at the small kitchen table. Yolanda left without being asked, pulling the door shut behind her with a quiet click. Claire set her bag on the table and looked at the coffee and didn't pick it up yet. "He knew which hotel," she said. "Your phone," Dominic said. He sat across from her. "Location services. You checked a route during the drive back from Bridgeport." "I know." She looked at him. "Who's the man Ethan called? The one you mentioned?" Dominic's expression shifted just slightly. "His name is Frank Cutter. He's done contract security work for several private interests over the years. He operates in the space between what's legal and what isn't." A pause. "He's not a professional killer. He's more like someone who specializes in making problems uncomfortable enough that they stop being problems. Intimidation. Intimidation, surveillance, sometimes physical confrontation." He held her gaze. "Claire, Ethan is scared. What I've seen in his communications in the last 24 hours, he's not operating strategically anymore. He's operating reactively. Reactive people are more dangerous." "Yes." No softening of that. "They are." She picked up the coffee. It was black, which was how she drank it, and she hadn't told him that. She filed the observation away without comment. "I need to tell you something," Dominic said. The quality of those words, the slight weight behind them, the particular way he'd paused before saying them, made her set the cup down. "What?" she said. He looked at the table for 1 second, then back at her. "I've been in contact with a federal agent, an FBI agent, for the past 4 months. She went very still. Her name is Special Agent Dana Reyes, Financial Crimes Division. I approached her through a contact in October." He kept his voice level, kept it direct, didn't look away. "I've been providing her with information about the VenCare structure in an informal capacity. Nothing that compromises what you have. Like, I was careful about that. But she's already building a parallel case. The stillness in Claire expanded outward. You've been working with the FBI. Yes. For 4 months. Yes. And you didn't tell me. He didn't flinch. No. She looked at him. The anger that moved through her was clean and cold, not the hot kind that required management, the cold kind, which was more dangerous because it didn't cloud anything. Why? Because the scope of what I was doing with Reyes was separate from you. I didn't know you had the routing document. I didn't know about Eleanor's notebooks. When I first approached the FBI, you weren't part of my plan. You were someone I was trying to warn and then help disappear long enough for the case to develop through other means. He met her eyes steadily. And then you turned out to be something different from what I expected. Different how? You didn't disappear. A beat. You went to Connecticut. You found an attorney. You found a forensic accountant. You built a chain of custody in 36 hours that took me 4 months to approximate. Something in his voice that wasn't quite admiration, more the recognition of a quality he'd underestimated. I kept the FBI contacts separate because I was still, at that point, calculating how much you needed to know about my own exposure. And now? Now you need to know all of it, because tomorrow morning, when Ellen Marsh calls the FBI, she's going to reach Dana Reyes. And when that happens, the fact that I've been in contact with Reyes for 4 months is going to be in the room. I wanted you to hear it from me first. Claire looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet. Somewhere in the building, a door closed and footsteps crossed above them. Is there anything else, she said, that you haven't told me? His jaw tightened very slightly. The tell of someone who is about to say something they've been deciding whether to say. There's one thing, about your father. She felt the cold in her chest recalibrate. I told you, he said, that patient accounts were selected algorithmically, that Ethan wouldn't have known individual names. A pause. That was partially true. The algorithm selected accounts. But there was a secondary list, a list of accounts that were flagged for higher extraction rates because the account holders had complained to the system and been logged as potential problems. He stopped. Your father complained. Multiple times to multiple departments. Every complaint was logged. And because of the complaint pattern, his account was moved to the secondary list. The silence in the kitchen had a different texture now. Which means, Claire said, and her voice was so level it didn't sound like her voice, that they knew his name, they knew he was complaining, and they took more from him. Yes. How much more? Over the full 19 months, closer to $70,000. A pause. Not 43. I gave you the lower number in the diner because I wasn't certain of the secondary list structure yet. I've confirmed it since. $70,000. Her father had died owing money he hadn't owed. He'd left an estate that was almost entirely debt, and she'd spent the year since his death quietly paying it down. And $70,000 of that debt had been manufactured by a system that had deliberately targeted him because he'd tried to ask questions. She pushed her chair back from the table. She stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the dark back of the building and the narrow strip of sky above the rooftops. She stood there for what might have been 2 minutes or might have been 5. Then she turned around. Call Dana Reyes, she said. Tonight. Tell her we have the routing document, 12 notebooks from Eleanor Vale, and a forensic accountant who's ready to present findings. Tell her we're ready to move. Dominic looked at her. Tonight is... Tell her tonight. Her voice was flat and final. I'm done waiting for a clean moment. Dana Reyes arrived at the Astoria apartment at 11:47 p.m. in dark jeans and a wool coat, carrying a bag that held a laptop and a recorder, and she had the demeanor of someone who had been woken from sleep and was professionally intact about it. She was 41, Puerto Rican, with sharp eyes that moved around the apartment once, and then settled on Claire with the particular focus of someone deciding how much of what they're seeing is reliable. She looked at Dominic. You look worse than you did in October. It's been an eventful week, he said. Reyes sat at the kitchen table across from Claire and produced the recorder, placed it on the table. Do you consent to being recorded? Yes, Claire said. Tell me everything in your own words from the beginning, Claire told her. She was thorough and chronological, and she didn't editorialize, because she'd spent enough time in clinical settings to know that editorializing is the enemy of credibility. She described the routing document and how she'd come to have it. She described the storage unit, the notebooks, the chain of custody established by Vera Shin and Paul. She described Ethan's calls, the licensing board complaint, the man in the hotel lobby. She described Eleanor Vale's key and Eleanor Vale's face in the pale light of a Connecticut window. Reyes asked precise, specific questions. She asked about metadata. She asked about the attorney's name and the forensic accountant's credentials and the name of the documentation specialist who'd photographed the notebooks. She asked about the specific bill codes on the routing document. She asked about the timeline of the digital purge. She didn't ask a single question about Claire's feelings or the relationship. Claire noted this and appreciated it. At 1:20 a.m., Reyes closed her laptop and looked at Claire steadily. The routing document alone, combined with the chain of custody on the notebooks, gives us enough to proceed to a warrant. The forensic accountant's preliminary findings will strengthen the warrant application. She paused. What I'm looking at here is a case that involves a sitting U.S. senator, that creates a specific set of procedural requirements and political exposures that I need you to understand. Tell me. Cases at this level develop leaks, not from my office, but from the layers around an investigation like this, because investigations at this level involve a lot of people and a lot of institutional interests. Once we begin the formal process, it is very likely that Ethan Vale will know within 72 hours that a federal investigation has been opened. A pause. At that point, he will either attempt to destroy remaining evidence, flee, or escalate against you, probably some combination of all three. What do you recommend? Reyes looked at her with a steady, flat regard. I recommend you do not go back to your apartment. I recommend you tell no one outside this room your location. And I recommend you be prepared for a controlled presentation of evidence within the next week, because once this starts moving, its momentum is going to dictate timeline, not our preferences. Claire looked at the recorder on the table, at Dominic, who was standing near the counter and who had said almost nothing since Reyes arrived, at the window, where a slip of December sky showed between the buildings. I'm ready, she said. She slept 4 hours on the apartment's narrow couch, and woke at 6 to the sound of Dominic on the phone in the kitchen, speaking quietly. She lay still for a moment and looked at the ceiling and thought about Vera Shin's office and 12 notebooks, and a federal agent who'd arrived at midnight with a recorder and sharp eyes. Then her phone, the new one from the glove box, rang. Ellen Marsh. 6:14 a.m. There's a problem, Marsh said. Her voice had the texture of someone who had also been up all night. A serious one. Claire, I need you to listen carefully. Claire sat up. I'm listening. Vencare filed an emergency injunction this morning, 5:40 a.m. They're claiming that the routing document you have constitutes theft of proprietary trade information in violation of your NDA, and are seeking an emergency order preventing you from disseminating, presenting, or using the document in any formal proceeding pending a hearing on the NDA claim. The room felt like it contracted slightly. They can't do that, Claire said. Evidence of a crime isn't protected by... They know that. The injunction isn't designed to succeed. It's designed to delay. If a judge grants a temporary restraining order pending the NDA hearing, you can't present the document to federal investigators until the hearing resolves, which could take weeks. Marsh's voice was controlled, but with something tight underneath it. There's more. Vencare's legal team has filed a simultaneous complaint with the New York Bar Association against me, alleging that I'm coaching a client to engage in trade secret theft. It's baseless, but it requires a formal response, which pulls my attention. They're trying to cut off the hands, Claire said. Simultaneously. Yes. A pause. Claire, I have to be honest with you. This is an aggressive legal play that requires resources and coordination. I did not expect at this speed. They filed at 5:40 in the morning. They had this ready. This was not reactive. This was prepared. Something in the architecture of the past 48 hours rearranged itself in Claire's mind. The timing, the hotel lobby, the pre-prepared legal filings, all of it moving too fast, too coordinated for a man who was operating reactively. She thought about what Dominic had said. He's not operating strategically anymore. She'd believed him. She stood up from the couch and went to the kitchen doorway. Dominic was still on the phone. She caught his eye, and the expression on her face made him end his call mid-sentence. Who else, she said, knew that we were going to move to Vera Shin's office for the notebooks? He stared at her. You, me, Vera, and Paul. And Dana Reyes. I told Reyes last night after you authorized the call. The notebooks were already in Vera's office by then. The injunction was filed at 5:40 this morning, before Reyes arrived here, before I authorized anything. She watched his face. Which means the filing was triggered by something that happened before last night. Dominic went very still. Vera Shin, he said slowly. Or Paul. Paul I've used before. I'd stake. Don't stake anything, Claire said sharply. Don't stake anything on anyone right now. She turned back to the phone. Ellen, is the injunction specific about what documentation it covers? It's broad, Marsh said. It covers any documentation removed from Vencare's network during your employment. Does it cover Eleanor Vale's notebooks? A pause. No. The notebooks were never part of Vencare's network. They're Eleanor Vale's personal property. Then they're still usable. Potentially, but without the routing document to establish the financial architecture. The routing document structure can be reconstructed from the notebooks if the notebooks are detailed enough about the account mechanisms. Claire was thinking as she talked, the clinical part of her brain that was good at finding the usable variable in a constrained situation. I need Vera's preliminary forensic findings on the notebooks, independent of the routing document. Claire, Marsh's voice was careful. Even if we work around the routing document, the injunction creates a legal cloud around you that will be used to discredit you with investigators. Vencare's legal team is good. They're going to make you look like a disgruntled ex-employee with a theft charge pending. Then we move faster than the injunction hearing date. She looked at Dominic. How long before Reyes can file for a warrant with what she has from last night? Dominic mouthed, 72 hours minimum. 3 days, Claire said to Marsh. Can you hold the injunction hearing off for 3 days? I can argue procedural grounds. Maybe. It's not guaranteed. A pause. Claire, I have to ask you directly. Is there anything about how you came to have the routing document that creates any legal exposure for you beyond the NDA claim? Any action that a court could characterize as intentional removal rather than inadvertent? I printed it, Claire said, during normal working hours from my own network access. For a work-related review I never completed, that's all. Then we have a defense. A beat. Get me Vera Shin's preliminary findings by end of day. Everything that can be established independently of the routing document. Claire hung up. She stood in the kitchen with the new phone in her hand and the weight of the morning pressing down with a specific, organized density. Dominic was watching her. Vera Shin, he said. You think she tipped them? I think someone did. She looked at him. You said you trust Paul. I've worked with him 3 times. That's not the same as trust either. She picked up her bag. I need to go to Vera's office. I'll come with, no. She looked at him steadily. You call Reyes. Tell her about the injunction and ask her how it affects the warrant timeline. I need to talk to Vera alone. A pause. If Vera tipped Ethan, she'll behave differently in the room with you there. He held her gaze. He didn't argue with the logic. Be careful. I'll be careful. She shouldered her bag. Call me the moment you reach Reyes. Vera Shin's office was on the 14th floor and opened at 8:30. Claire was in the lobby at 8:22, watching the elevator bank. She'd taken the subway, 3 trains, 1 unnecessary transfer, and she was reasonably confident she hadn't been followed, though she was aware that reasonable confidence was a declining currency. Vera came in through the lobby at 8:31. She saw Claire and something moved across her face. Surprise, but the kind that was too fast, too controlled. Claire, her voice was measured. I wasn't expecting, can we talk in your office? They went up. The office was empty except for Vera's assistant, whom Vera sent on a coffee errand with the efficiency of someone who needed the room cleared. She closed the office door and turned to Claire, and her face had settled into a careful, professional neutral. Claire looked at her. Vencare filed an emergency injunction at 5:40 this morning. Vera said nothing. It was prepared, Claire said, not reactive. They had the legal framework ready before we went to Bridgeport yesterday. She watched Vera's face. Who did you tell? The silence stretched 4 full seconds. Vera. Claire's voice was flat. I need you to tell me right now because if you don't, and this comes out through a federal investigation, and it will, because there's a federal investigation that was authorized last night. The distinction between voluntary disclosure and discovered concealment is going to matter significantly to you. Vera's jaw moved. She looked at the window, then back at Claire. I have a consulting contract with Meridian Capital Advisory. It's a separate entity from VenCare. I didn't know the connection when I took it 18 months ago. Her voice was precise and not without guilt. When Dominic Moretti contacted me through the mutual source, I ran a conflict check. I should have found the connection. I didn't look hard enough. A beat. Yesterday, after we returned from Bridgeport, I received a call from the Meridian contact. They knew I'd been brought in. They didn't ask me directly. They just asked how my caseload was looking, and She stopped. You told them what you'd found in the notebooks, Claire said. I told them the scope was significant. Vera's voice was tight and hated itself. I didn't give them specifics. I thought I was... She stopped again. I don't have an excuse. Claire looked at her for a long moment. The anger was there, the same cold, organized anger, but underneath it something more complicated. Because Vera Shin wasn't a villain, and that made it worse, not better. Vera was someone who'd made a bad judgment in a pressurized moment, and that was the kind of human failure that didn't have a clean category. The notebooks, Claire said. Where are they right now? Locked evidence cabinet. My office. I need them. Today. Transferred to federal custody through Ellen Marsh. Vera looked at her. I'll cooperate with any investigation. Full disclosure of my Meridian contact and everything I told them. Her voice was steadier now, settling into the discipline of consequence management. Claire, I'm sorry. I made a serious... I know, Claire said. Right now I need the notebooks. She was in a cab with the banker's box on her lap, heading toward Marsh's office, when the new phone rang. Unknown number, not Dominic's. She answered it. Claire, Ethan's voice, and the smoothness was entirely gone from it now. What was left underneath was something raw. Stop. She didn't speak. I know you went to Connecticut. I know you have my mother's notebooks. I know you spoke to an FBI agent last night. His voice was tight and controlled in the way that a container is controlled, by pressure from outside rather than from structure within. You have no idea what you're holding. You think you're doing something righteous. You're walking into something that will destroy you and everyone near you, and you don't have all the information. Then give me the information, she said. A pause. I want to meet. No. Claire, there's a federal investigation, she said, active as of last night. An injunction filed by your legal team this morning won't survive contact with a federal warrant application, and you know that. You're calling me because the legal play isn't going to work, and this is the next option. She kept her voice steady. What are you offering? The pause was longer. Everything, he said. The licensing board complaint withdrawn. Your father's account fully restored. Every dollar. I'll transfer Bennett House to your name. I know that's what you wanted to call it. I know about the nonprofit you were planning. His voice was doing something complicated, reaching for the version of intimacy that had always worked on her. Marry me. I'll end it all. The whole structure. I'll dismantle it. Cooperate with investigators. Give them everything. And Madison, Claire said. Silence. Right, she said. That wasn't... He stopped. Started differently. I made mistakes. I know what I did to you. I'm telling you that I can fix it. All of it. If you stop this now. Before it goes to places neither of us can come back from. She thought about 12 notebooks. About Eleanor Vale pressing a brass key into her palm. About a forensic accountant she'd trusted who'd made a phone call she shouldn't have. About $70,000 extracted from her father's account because he'd been flagged as a problem for asking questions. My father died thinking he didn't understand the billing, she said. He was embarrassed. He apologized. To me, and probably to everyone he called to try to get help. She paused. He was one of the smartest men I've ever known, and he died thinking something was wrong with his comprehension because you needed his account numbers to be invisible. Ethan said nothing. Don't call me again, Claire said. Talk to Marsh. She hung up. The cab moved through Midtown in the late morning traffic, and Claire held the banker's box in her lap with both hands and looked out the window and felt something in her chest that wasn't anger anymore and wasn't grief and wasn't exactly resolve either. Something harder to name. A state that lived on the far side of all those things. the condition of someone who has made the final decision and now simply has to execute it. She was 3 blocks from Marsh's office when the cab came to an abrupt stop. Not a traffic stop, a lurch, a sudden full brake, the driver saying something she didn't catch as she was pitched slightly forward against the seat in front. She looked up. A black SUV had pulled directly across the cab's path. The driver's door was opening. Not Frank Cutter, a woman, lean and purposeful, moving toward the cab with a hand in her coat pocket. Claire grabbed the banker's box and shoved the cab door open. She went left on instinct, into the narrow gap between the cab and a parked delivery truck, and she moved, the box clutched against her chest, thinking in fragments. The box, keep the box, get to Marsh's building. 3 blocks. 3 blocks is nothing. A hand caught her arm from behind. Hard. Sure. She spun and drove her elbow back into the contact point, and whoever was behind her, not the woman from the SUV, someone else, someone she hadn't seen, made a sound and the grip loosened and she pulled free and ran. Actually ran now, the box against her chest with both arms, her bag slamming against her hip, 3 blocks in heels on a Manhattan sidewalk, while the city went on around her with absolute indifference. She came through the doors of Marsh's building at a run and went straight to the security desk and said, "Call Ellen Marsh now. Tell her Claire Bennett is in the lobby and I need her down here right now." And she stood with her back to the wall and the banker's box held against her front and her heart doing something enormous and entirely functional in her chest. The security guard was on the phone. Claire looked at the revolving door. No one came through. She stood there breathing and looked at the box in her arms and understood with absolute clarity that what she was holding had just made 3 separate people move to physically take it from her on a Manhattan street, which meant it was exactly as important as Eleanor Vale had believed it was, and which meant that the last pretense of a clean, controlled legal process had just burned down on a midtown sidewalk. She was in it now in the only way that mattered. There was no version of the next several weeks that didn't cost her something she couldn't get back. And Ethan Vale was going to make sure of that in every way available to him, and none of that was going to stop her, because her father had died apologizing for not understanding money that was being stolen from him. And the only thing left that Claire Bennett absolutely could not do was let that be the end of his story. The elevator opened and Ellen Marsh stepped out, took one look at Claire's face and the box in her arms and said, "Come upstairs, right now." And as Claire crossed the lobby toward her, the new phone in her pocket buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. 4 words, no signature, that stopped her mid-step and made the air in the lobby feel suddenly completely different. "They have your mother." 4 words. Claire read them again, standing in the lobby of Ellen Marsh's building with the banker's box pressed against her chest and her heart doing something large and mechanical behind her ribs. "They have your mother. No signature, no follow-up." The number was a string of digits she didn't recognize, and when she called it back immediately, it rang 4 times and went to a recording that said the voicemail box had not been set up. Marsh was beside her now, one hand on Claire's arm, steering her toward the elevator. "Come upstairs. Talk to me." "My mother." Claire let herself be moved. The elevator doors opened and she stepped in and turned to face the lobby while the doors closed, watching the revolving entrance as if someone might come through it. No one did. "Someone just texted me that they have my mother." Marsh's face went very still. "When did your aunt take her to Connecticut?" 2 days ago." Claire was already on the new phone, dialing her Aunt Carol's number. It rang and rang. 6 rings, then voicemail. She hung up and dialed again. Same result. The elevator opened on the 14th floor. Claire walked toward Marsh's conference room without waiting to be led, the box under one arm, the phone in her other hand, dialing Carol a 3rd time. On the 4th ring, someone answered, not Carol. A man's voice, brief and professional. "Ms. Bennett." Claire stopped walking. "Who is this?" "Your mother is fine. She's comfortable. She'll stay that way as long as you listen carefully." A pause. Not theatrical. Efficient. Like someone reading from a prepared text they'd written for a different kind of business. "Mr. Vale wants the notebooks. All 12. The routing document if you still have it. In exchange, your mother goes home within the hour, and this conversation never happened." "Put her on," Claire said. A silence. Then shuffling. Then her mother's voice. Confused, slightly frightened, but present. "Claire? I don't know where Carol went. There was a man at the..." The line went back to the professional voice. You have until noon. There's an address. Write it down. Claire wrote it down on the back of a Marsh & Associates business card she found in her jacket pocket. A warehouse address in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. The line went dead. She stood in the corridor outside Marsh's conference room and looked at the address on the business card and felt something move through her that she recognized from the worst nights of her nursing career. The moment in a crisis when your body decides fear is a luxury and switches to a different operating mode entirely. Colder, faster, stripped of everything except what the next 60 seconds required. She turned to Marsh. Call Reyes. Right now. The cell number she gave you last night. Claire, call her. She set the banker's box on the floor next to the conference room door. My mother is in a warehouse in Greenpoint. I have until noon. It is currently 8:57. Marsh was already on her phone. Claire dialed Dominic. He answered in half a ring. What happened? They took my mother. She gave him the address. Greenpoint warehouse. Noon deadline. They want the notebooks. A silence that lasted exactly 2 seconds. Don't go there alone. I'm not going there at all. Reyes needs time to mobilize. You don't have time. His voice was very controlled. How many people do you think are there? I don't know. The man who called you, did you recognize the voice? No. Cutter. His voice was certain. Frank Cutter. This is how he operates. Clean deadline, specific address, professional tone. He's not going to hurt her before the deadline. A pause. After the deadline is a different calculation. Claire looked at Marsh, who was speaking in a low, rapid voice to someone on her phone. She looked at the business card with the Greenpoint address. She looked at the banker's box on the floor. What do you have available? She said to Dominic. Right now, not theoretical, actual. A beat. Yolanda, 2 other people I trust, 20 minutes. Reyes needs to know the location, whether she can mobilize fast enough or not. Claire was moving now toward Marsh. Can your people do a perimeter without going in? Hold the exits, make sure she doesn't get moved, give Reyes something to arrive to? Yes. Then do it. I'll get to you. She looked at Marsh and held out her hand. Marsh gave her the phone without being asked. Agent Reyes. I heard, Reyes said. Greenpoint address. I'm mobilizing. I need 40 minutes minimum to get a team with proper authorization. Her voice was precise and without panic. Claire, do not enter that building. My mother will be safe for the next 3 hours if Cutter is running this, and if he's operating on Vale's instruction. Cutter doesn't hurt elderly women on a deadline before the deadline passes. That's his only constraint, but it's a real one. A pause. Give me 40 minutes. Keep your phone on. Do not go in. Claire handed the phone back to Marsh. She looked at the box on the floor. She thought about noon. She thought about 40 minutes. She thought about her mother's voice on the phone, confused, and the specific way her mother had said, I don't know where Carol went. Not frightened in the acute way, but disoriented. The way her early memory decline sometimes left her when things moved too fast around her. She thought about what happened after noon. She picked up the banker's box. Claire, Marsh's voice. Reyes said, I heard what Reyes said. She looked at her attorney. Put the notebooks into evidence protocol today. Chain of custody goes directly to Reyes's office. Everything we have goes on record, now, before noon, so that even if Ethan gets the physical copies, she stopped. The evidence already exists. It's already in motion. He can't unring that. Marsh looked at her with the expression of someone who was absorbing several things simultaneously. What are you going to do? I'm going to Greenpoint, Claire said. Not to go in. To be close enough that when Reyes arrives, I can tell her exactly what I observed. She held Marsh's eyes. And because my mother is 70 years old with early memory decline, and she is in a warehouse in Brooklyn, and I am not going to sit in a conference room on Park Avenue South while that is happening. Marsh looked at her for a long moment. Then she took the banker's box from Claire's arms. I'll handle this end. Go. Dominic met her in a car on 34th, Yolanda driving again, 2 men in the back who Claire didn't know and didn't ask about. She got in the front passenger seat and Dominic was beside Yolanda, and he turned and looked at Claire. And what passed between them wasn't a conversation. It was an assessment, mutual, fast, the kind of communication that happens between people who are past the point where there's a comfortable thing to say. 40 minutes for Reyes, Claire said. Dominic looked at his watch. We'll have eyes on the building in 50 soon. How many exits? I looked up the property record. The building's a former textile warehouse, 2 stories, 4 access points. Loading dock on the east side, main entrance facing the street, 2 fire exits on the north and south ends. He'd been working since she'd called. She noted this without comment. The loading dock is most likely where they brought her in. Are your people going to spook Cutter? They know how to be invisible. He looked at her directly. Claire, you understand that going within visual range of that building is already more than Reyes authorized. I understand that my mother is in that building. He held her gaze. Then he turned back to face forward. They drove in silence through the Queens Midtown Tunnel and north into Brooklyn, Yolanda navigating without using the phone's GPS, from memory, the way people navigate who are used to not being traceable. Claire watched the city change from Midtown's density to the lower industrial texture of Greenpoint, warehouses, auto repair, the particular urban geography of neighborhoods that hadn't finished being one thing and hadn't yet become the next. Her phone buzzed. Marsh. Notebooks transferred to Reyes's custody via emergency evidence protocol. Digital copies secured on federal server. Routing documents submitted under seal. Everything is on record. Claire read it, and her chest did something complicated. Whatever Ethan did now, whatever Cutter had or hadn't done in that warehouse, the evidence existed. It was in federal hands. The clock on Ethan Vale's operation had officially started, and nothing that happened in the next 3 hours could stop it. She texted back, "Good, thank you." The car stopped 2 blocks from the address on the business card, on a side street between a body shop and a loading facility, and Dominic's people got out of the back without being instructed and moved away in different directions with the unhurried efficiency of people who did this kind of thing often enough to have developed a gait for it. Claire got out too. Dominic got out beside her. "You should stay in the car," he said. "No." He looked at her. He didn't argue. They moved on foot toward the warehouse address, staying on the east side of the block. Not because Claire knew the tactical geometry, but because Dominic walked east and she walked with him. The building came into view at the end of the block, a 2-story brick structure with painted-over windows on the second floor, a chain-link perimeter on the loading dock side, a rusted steel door facing the street. A white panel van was parked against the curb on the building's south side. No visible activity. No sounds she could separate from the ambient noise of the neighborhood. Her phone said 9:43. They stopped at the corner, in the shadow of the body shop's overhang, and Claire watched the building's front entrance and counted her own breaths and waited. At 9:51, the steel door opened. Frank Cutter came out. She didn't know his face, but she knew the type. The build, the bearing, the particular quality of alertness that certain men carried as a default setting. He stood in the doorway and looked at his phone and then looked up and down the street. His gaze moved across their position at the corner. Claire did not move. Cutter's eyes continued past them. He went back inside. Beside her, Dominic let out a breath that was carefully controlled. He leaned close and spoke very quietly near her ear. "He didn't see us, or he would have moved differently." Claire nodded. Her own breathing was steady, which was something she'd learned in her first year on the ward. The body under controlled stress finds a rhythm if you let it, and you do better work in that rhythm than in the spaces between it. Her phone buzzed. "Reyes. 20 minutes. Team is mobile. Do not move on the building." She showed the screen to Dominic. He read it and nodded. 20 minutes. She looked at the warehouse. She thought about her mother saying, "I don't know where Carol went," with the tone of someone who was trying to be cooperative and reasonable in a situation that had moved too fast for her to track. Ruth Bennett had spent 40 years being cooperative and reasonable. She had managed a household and a husband's long illness, and a daughter's chaotic early nursing career, and a widowhood she'd handled with the particular dignity of someone who had decided that grief was private. She had early memory decline, and she was in a warehouse in Greenpoint because her daughter had printed a spreadsheet 7 months ago and filed it in a box and forgotten about it. Claire's jaw tightened. At 10:04, her phone rang. The Cutter number again. She answered. "You're on the block." Not a question. His voice had the same professional flatness as before, but with something sharper underneath. "Don't be stupid." Claire said nothing. "The deadline is noon. That hasn't changed, but I'm aware that you've involved federal investigators, which changes the parameters of what I'm willing to hold here." A pause. "I'm going to give you a choice that isn't on the original list. You come inside. You talk to Vale, he's here, and you reach an agreement before the federal team arrives. Your mother goes home. Nobody gets charged with anything they couldn't have avoided. Ethan is there. Yes. Claire looked at Dominic. He was watching her face and reading her expression, and she saw the exact moment he understood what she was considering, because his expression shifted from controlled to something more immediate. He shook his head. Once. Definite. She looked at the warehouse. "Give me 5 minutes," she said into the phone. "You have 3. She hung up. "No," Dominic said immediately. "Absolutely not. He's offering a conversation before the federal team arrives. That means Ethan is scared enough to negotiate, which means it's a room you don't come out of the same way you went in." His voice was quiet and absolutely direct. "Claire, Reyes is 20 minutes out. Your mother will be safe until noon. Do not walk into that building. If Ethan talks to me in there, he won't say anything in there that helps you. He'll say whatever is necessary to get the notebooks back and to compromise your credibility with Reyes." He looked at her with an intensity that was past professional concern, and they both knew it. "You have everything you need. The evidence is already in federal custody. Don't give him an opportunity to muddy what you've built." She stood on the corner and looked at the warehouse and thought about her mother and thought about the evidence on a federal server and thought about noon and thought about 20 minutes. She dialed Cutter's number. "I'm not coming in," she said. A pause. "Then the deadline stands." "The deadline is irrelevant," she said. "There's a federal team 18 minutes from this location. When they arrive, you have a choice about how that goes for you. I'm offering you the same thing you offered me, a conversation before they get here." She kept her voice level and unhurried. "You're an employee, Cutter. Ethan Vale is inside that building trying to stop a federal investigation that is already a done fact. Whatever he's paying you for today is not worth a federal obstruction charge." A pause. "My mother walks out that door in the next 5 minutes. You walk away from the building, and when the federal team asks me what I observed, I tell them I observed a building and a van." She stopped. "Or you stay. And you're standing there when they arrive, and everything that happened today becomes part of a case that is going to result in multiple federal convictions." Silence on the line. 12 seconds of silence. Then, "The door's opening." Claire looked up. The steel door swung out. Her mother came through it, not running, not hurt, walking with the slightly careful gait of someone who'd been sitting for a while in a cold place. She was wearing her coat. She had her purse on her arm, which meant someone had thought to give it to her, and Claire found that detail both reassuring and infuriating in equal measure. Ruth Bennett reached the sidewalk and stopped and looked around with the expression of someone who had decided that whatever had just happened was going to require a significant amount of processing, and that she was going to do that processing later, in private, when she had more information. Claire crossed the street. Her mother saw her, and something in the old woman's face reorganized itself from managed confusion into pure relief. And that relief hit Claire somewhere very specific, behind the sternum, like a key turning. "Claire, Ruth's voice was steady. "I don't understand what is happening." "I know." Claire took her mother's arm. "I'll explain later. Let's go." She walked her mother back toward Dominic's car without looking at the warehouse, without looking back. Dominic was already there, had the rear door open, helped Ruth into the back seat with a gentleness that was efficient rather than performative. Yolanda was behind the wheel. Claire got in. "Drive," she said. "Not fast, normal." Yolanda drove. Claire looked at her mother in the back seat. Ruth, who was sitting upright with her purse on her lap and looking out the window with the expression she'd always worn when she was thinking hard about something she didn't yet have enough information to speak on. She was physically unharmed. She was shaken in a way she was actively managing. She was in the specific way that Ruth Bennett managed every difficult thing, going to be okay. Claire looked at her phone, texted Reyes. "My mother is out. Building may still have Cutter and Vale inside. I'm clear of the area." Reyes texted back in 40 seconds. "Good. Stay clear. We're 12 minutes out." Claire put the phone in her pocket and looked out the window at Brooklyn moving past and let herself feel, for approximately 45 seconds, the thing she'd been holding back since she'd read the text message in Marcia's lobby. The shaking in her hands that she hadn't allowed. The way the morning had moved from a hotel lobby to a cab ambush to a warehouse in Greenpoint in the span of 3 hours. Then she put it back in the controlled place and looked at Dominic, who was riding in the front passenger seat and who had turned slightly to watch her. "The evidence is in federal custody," she said. "Everything. The notebooks, the routing document, Vera Shin's preliminary forensic findings, your testimony on file with Reyes." "Yes," he said. "He can't stop it now." "No." His voice was certain. "He can't." Ruth Bennett reached forward from the back seat and put her hand over Claire's. Just that. She didn't say anything. She just put her hand over Claire's hand and held it, the way she'd held it when Claire was 7 years old and had fallen off her bicycle and was trying very hard not to cry. Claire turned her palm up and held her mother's hand and stared out the windshield. The federal team entered the Greenpoint warehouse at 10:32 a.m. Dana Reyes led it with 8 agents and 2 vehicles, and the kind of coordinated ground-level authority that made the morning feel like it had suddenly shifted into a different gear. They found Frank Cutter in the building's main space with 2 other men. He didn't run. He sat in a folding chair near the loading dock with his hands visible, and the look of someone who had made a calculation and arrived at the least bad available option. Ethan Vale was not in the building. Claire got that information from Reyes in a phone call at 11:15. She was in Marcia's conference room by then, her mother in a chair with a cup of tea that Marcia's assistant had produced, and Ruth Bennett was listening with the particular quality of attention she brought to things she intended to fully understand before she spoke about them. "He left before we arrived," Reyes said. "There's a rear access through the building's mechanical room that isn't on the property record. He knew the layout." "Where is he now?" "We're working on that." A pause. "Claire, the warrant for Ethan Vale, for Madison Hale, for Senator Calloway, and for 3 named corporate officers was signed an hour ago. It's active. He can't leave the country. We have CBP notification in place." Another pause. "He's going to be found." "When?" "Soon." Her voice was careful. "This is the part where you have to let it be federal business." Claire looked at the conference room table, at the faint ring left by her coffee cup, at her mother across the table, listening. "All right," she said. She hung up. She sat with the silence of the room for a moment. Then Dominic's name came up on her phone. She answered. "He went to the gala," Dominic said. She stared at the conference room table. "What?" "The Whitmore Grand, Vencare's annual investor presentation. It was already scheduled for tonight. He's going to the event." A pause. "It's either the best move or the worst one he could make. Public venue, investors, press, the appearance of normalcy." A beat. "Or he's trying to get ahead of it. Make announcements, manage the narrative, control the room one more time before everything closes in." Claire thought about the Whitmore Grand, the Crystal Ballroom. 500 people in chandelier light and cameras positioned so subtly you almost didn't notice them. The place where this had started. She thought about the active federal warrants. She thought about investors who were in that room tonight who had put money into a structure built on stolen patient accounts, who deserved to know what they'd funded before the news cycle told them in the messiest possible way. She looked at her mother. Ruth was watching her with the expression she'd always worn when she understood more about what her daughter was thinking than Claire had said aloud. "He's going to control that room," Claire said. "He's going to stand up there and tell 500 people that what they're about to hear from investigators is a misunderstanding. He's going to buy himself 48 hours of narrative management and use it to make the case harder." "Probably," Dominic said. "The federal team won't move on him in a public venue unless there's a reason to." Claire was already thinking forward. "The investors in that room, the board members, they have a right to know what they've been participating in before Ethan shapes the story for them." She paused. "And I have evidence on a federal server that is now public record. I'm a person who is employed by Vencare. I'm a person who has a federal whistleblower filing active as of this morning." She stopped. "I have the right to be in that room." A long pause from Dominic. "Claire," he said, "if you walk into that gala tonight, he took my mother." Her voice was quiet and absolute. "He took my nursing license. He took my father's money while my father was dying. He took 6 years of my life." She paused. "I was at the Whitmore Grand 10 days ago in a midnight blue dress, and I watched him propose to another woman in front of 500 people, and I walked out because I thought the dignified thing was to leave quietly." She stopped. "I'm not leaving quietly." The silence on the line held for 3 full seconds. "I'll be there," Dominic said. 8 o'clock. She hung up. She looked at her mother. Ruth Bennett set down her teacup. She looked at her daughter with the clear, steady eyes of someone who had listened to every word and processed it and arrived at a position. "What do you need?" she said. Simply, no drama, just the question. Claire looked at her mother. She thought about 12 notebooks in federal custody. She thought about a routing document with a forensic accountant's analysis attached. She thought about Dominic Moretti, who had started as a warning in a hotel corridor and had become something she didn't yet have the right word for. She thought about Dana Reyes and Ellen Marsh and Vera Shin, who had failed her once and would spend the rest of this case making up for it. She thought about the evidence that was already, right now, sitting in a federal server under her name, telling the truth about everything. "Address," Claire said. "Not Midnight Blue." Ruth looked at her daughter for a long moment. Something moved behind the old woman's eyes, complicated and maternal and fierce. Then she nodded. "All right," Ruth said. "Let's find you something to wear." The Whitmore Grand's crystal ballroom filled exactly the way it had 10 days ago. The same chandelier light, the same carefully arranged wealth, the same ambient pressure of people performing ease in a room built for it. Claire came in through the main entrance at 8:12 in a dress the color of dark amber that her mother had found in the back of a closet in Marsh's building. The assistant had approximately Claire's size and had offered without being asked, and Claire had accepted without ceremony. She had her phone. She had a folded printout of the federal warrant, which Reyes had authorized her to carry for the specific purpose of this evening. She had the card that said Ellen Marsh, attorney at law, federal whistleblower cases, and she had the card that said Dana Reyes, special agent, FBI Financial Crimes Division, with a direct number on the back. She had nothing else. She didn't need anything else. The room was full. She recognized faces, board members, investors, political figures, media people she'd seen at prior events. She moved through the crowd with the same quiet efficiency she'd learned on hospital wards, and people stepped aside without quite knowing why. She saw Dominic at the far end of the room near the bar, wearing a dark suit, holding a glass of water he wasn't drinking. He saw her at the same moment, and something in his face, not relief exactly, more like recognition. She crossed to him. "He's here," Dominic said quietly. "VIP section. He arrived 20 minutes ago. Madison is with him. Calloway's chief of staff is here, but not Calloway himself." "Calloway's already lawyered up," Claire said, 3 hours ago. His office released a statement saying he's cooperating with investigators. A dry pause. Cooperating is another word for negotiating his exposure. Claire looked toward the VIP section. She could see Ethan from across the room. The profile she knew as well as her own hands. The posture, the particular way he occupied space, as if the room had been arranged specifically to accommodate him. He hadn't seen her yet. "The remarks," she said. "When does he go to the podium?" "Program says 9 o'clock. She looked at her watch. 8:22. "Then we have 38 minutes, she said. "Claire." Dominic's voice was very quiet. "What are you going to do?" She looked at him. She thought about what Reyes had said. There's a protocol. This has to go through official channels. She thought about the warrant in her pocket. She thought about 500 people in this room who were about to hear Ethan Vale stand at a microphone and tell them a story designed to protect himself. "I'm going to tell the truth," she said. "In a room full of people who funded this, in a building where it started, before he gets to tell his version of it." She held Dominic's eyes. "After which, whatever happens to me happens. But they will have heard it." Dominic looked at her for a long moment. His expression was doing something complicated. The face of a man who knew that what she was about to do was going to change the shape of the next several years for both of them, and who had arrived, somewhere in the last 10 days, at a place where he was going to stand next to her while she did it. "I have something to tell you first," he said, "before you do this." He set the water glass down on a nearby table. "I spoke to Reyes an hour ago. There's something in the notebooks, in Eleanor's records. A meeting from the second year of Vencare's operation." He paused. "Your father attended that meeting, not as a patient, as an investor contact. Ethan approached him early, before your father was ever in the patient network. He was pitched on Vencare as an investment opportunity. A beat. Father turned him down. He said the structure didn't look right." He held her eyes. "And 6 months later, your father's medical account was enrolled in the Vencare patient network. Not by your father's choice, by a care facility administrator who had a consulting contract with Care. He stopped. It wasn't an algorithm, Claire. Your father was specifically targeted because he'd turned Ethan down and because he'd said the structure didn't look right. The crystal ballroom went on around her. The conversation, the music, the particular ambient hum of 500 people performing normalcy. Claire stood in the middle of all of it and held Dominic's eyes and felt the thing in her chest that had been organizing itself across 10 days of evidence and motion and fear and determination arrive, finally, at its actual shape. Her father had seen it. He had been 63 years old at that meeting, a retired high school chemistry teacher with careful eyes and a habit of writing things down. And he had looked at Ethan Vale's structure and said, "This doesn't look right." And Ethan had made him pay for the clarity of that observation for the rest of his life. "He knew," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "He knew something was wrong," Dominic said. "He didn't have the evidence. He just had the instinct." A pause. "It's in the notebooks." Eleanor wrote it down. She wrote down what Ethan said after your father left the meeting. He held her gaze. He said, "David Bennett is going to be a problem someday." Claire looked across the crystal ballroom at Ethan Vale in the VIP section, laughing at something someone had said. She looked at the podium at the far end of the room. She looked at her watch. 8:26. She turned to Dominic. "Stay close," she said, and she began to walk. She walked toward the podium the way she'd walked through difficult nights on the ward. Not fast, not slow, with the specific economy of someone who has decided what needs to be done and is no longer spending energy on the decision. The room was still in cocktail configuration, people standing in clusters with drinks, the stage empty, the podium lit but unoccupied. 9 o'clock was still 32 minutes away. Claire didn't have 32 minutes to spare, and she wasn't going to wait for someone else's schedule to determine when the truth got told. She felt Dominic behind her, not close enough to crowd her, close enough to be present. She didn't look back. She was 15 feet from the stage steps when Ethan saw her. She watched it happen across the room. The moment his eyes found her, the half-second of something that might have been genuine shock, and then the rapid recalibration, the professional mask settling back into place over whatever was underneath it. He said something to the man beside him. He started moving. Claire reached the stage steps first. She went up. The room didn't go quiet immediately. It went quiet in waves, the people nearest the stage first, then spreading outward as the visual registered. A woman in amber standing at the Care podium who was not on the program. She didn't reach for the microphone dramatically. She just moved it slightly toward her and looked out at the room and waited for the wave of quiet to reach the back. It took about 8 seconds. Ethan was at the foot of the stage stairs. He didn't come up. Something in his calculation, the cameras, the media people she could see on the room's periphery, the specific public quality of the moment, held him at the bottom step. His face was controlled and his eyes were not. "My name is Claire Bennett," she said. Her voice came out of the speakers with a clarity she hadn't entirely anticipated. "Until 10 days ago, I was the Senior Patient Outreach Coordinator for Care's Eastern Division. Before that, I was a registered nurse. And before either of those things, I was the daughter of David Bennett, who was a patient in the Care Coordination Network until his death 14 months ago." The room was completely still now. 500 people and the particular quality of collective attention that only happens when something is occurring that no one was prepared for. "I'm going to tell you something tonight that you should have been told before you invested in this company, before you sat on this board, before you attended this event." She kept her voice level. Not loud, not performing, just telling. Care Solutions has been engaged in a systematic financial fraud for 5 years. Patient accounts, elderly patients, primarily, enrolled in the Care Coordination Network, have been used as pass-through vehicles for extracting funds that were then routed through a series of shell companies to accounts benefiting this company's founder and several of his associates. She paused. The total extracted from patient accounts is estimated at between $200 and $250 million. Someone in the room made a sound. She didn't look toward it. Federal warrants have been issued as of this morning for Ethan Vale, Madison Hale, and 3 named corporate officers for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, and obstruction of justice. She reached into the small folded clutch she was carrying and produced the warrant summary, held it up. Not theatrically, just visibly. The full evidentiary record is currently in federal custody. It includes 12 notebooks of contemporaneous documentation kept by Eleanor Vale, a pre-purge transfer reconciliation record from VenCare's internal network, and a forensic analysis conducted by a certified financial crime specialist. She set the warrant back in her clutch. Several of the board members in this room received direct payments from subsidiary entities connected to this structure. Senator Callaway's campaign finance infrastructure received funds cycling through this network in exchange for regulatory protection. She stopped. Those facts are on record. The quiet in the room had become a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of people waiting to hear more, but the silence of people recalibrating everything they'd walked into the building believing. Ethan came up the stairs. He came up calmly, with the walk of a man who'd decided that the scenario called for a specific performance and was going to deliver it. He came to the podium and looked at Claire with an expression that said, to anyone watching who didn't know his face, that he was concerned and composed and prepared to address a misunderstanding. She stepped back one step and gave him the microphone. She was going to let him try. Claire. His voice was warm, carefully, precisely warm. I understand you've been through an incredibly difficult don't, she said quietly, just to him, close enough that the microphone might or might not have caught it. He looked at her. The warmth in his voice didn't reach his eyes, and they both knew it, and they both knew that the other knew it. There are significant inaccuracies in what you've just described, he said to the room. And I understand that this is a painful situation for someone who, Ethan, her voice was quiet and absolute. Your father saw it too. Before he died, he found money that wasn't where it should be. Eleanor wrote it down. She held his eyes. She wrote down everything. Something happened to his face. Not the professional mask slipping, something under the mask, something structural, like a wall taking weight it hadn't been built to take. It was brief. It was real. My mother, he started. Your mother left a door open for someone to come through. Claire looked at him steadily. She couldn't stop what you built, but she kept the record. She kept it for years in a storage unit in Bridgeport, and she put the key in her cardigan pocket, and she waited for someone she trusted. A pause. That's what she thought of what you built. The room around them was a held breath. Ethan stood at the podium of the company he'd spent 10 years building and looked at Claire Bennett in a dress the color of dark amber, and whatever calculation he was running, she could see it happening behind his eyes, the rapid assessment of options, the remaining moves. She could see the moment it finished, the moment he understood that the moves had run out. This is not the appropriate venue, he said. His voice had dropped the warmth. What was left was just the structure of the sentence. You chose the venue, Claire said. You came here tonight when you could have gone anywhere else. You came here because you thought you could still control this room. She looked at him without anger, without satisfaction, without anything that required a response. Just looking at him clearly. You can't. She turned from the podium and walked back down the stage stairs. At the bottom, Dana Reyes was standing with two agents in civilian clothes who had apparently been in the room for longer than Claire had known. Reyes looked at her with an expression that contained several things. Professional acknowledgement, a pointed message about authorization that they were going to have a conversation about later, and underneath both of those, something that was more direct. Nicely done, Reyes said quietly. Then louder, to the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Special Agent Dana Reyes with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I'm going to ask everyone to remain calm and stay in the room while my team secures the exits. We have some paperwork to process tonight. She moved past Claire toward the stage. Claire stood at the base of the stairs and listened to the room reorganize itself around the arrival of consequence, and she felt something move through her chest that she didn't immediately have a name for. Not triumph, not relief. Something quieter than both of those. Something with more texture to it. The feeling of a weight that had been present for so long you'd stopped noticing it, lifting just enough that you could feel the shape of the space it left behind. Dominic was beside her. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, which was the right thing. The arrest of Ethan Vale happened in the Whitmore Grand's Crystal Ballroom at 8:59 p.m., 1 minute before the program was scheduled to begin, in front of approximately 480 witnesses, 14 members of the press, and 6 investors who would spend the following months cooperating with federal investigators in exchange for reduced civil exposure. Madison Hale was taken into custody in the hotel's VIP anteroom, where she'd been watching proceedings on a monitor. She didn't resist. She sat down in a chair and asked for her attorney in a voice that was very controlled and very quiet. And the agent who processed her noted in his report that she appeared to have been expecting it. 3 corporate officers were arrested at their respective homes that evening by coordinating teams. Senator Callaway had preemptively surrendered to investigators at the federal building on Foley Square at 7:40 p.m., accompanied by 4 attorneys and a statement that used the word cooperation 14 times in 6 paragraphs. The statement did not include an apology to anyone whose account had funded his political infrastructure. Frank Cutter and his 2 associates were charged with unlawful detention and federal obstruction. Cutter cooperated fully and completely within 3 hours of his initial interview, providing detailed records of his communications with Ethan Vale's office over the preceding 2 weeks. His cooperation reduced his exposure significantly. Claire was not asked to weigh in on the terms of that reduction, which was the appropriate protocol, and which she accepted. Vera Shin submitted a full voluntary disclosure to the FBI the morning after the gala. Every detail of her Meridian Advisory Consulting contract, every communication she'd had with the contact following the Bridgeport visit. The disclosure was thorough and difficult, and she sent Claire a brief letter that didn't ask for forgiveness, and didn't offer excuses, and said simply that she was sorry and that she intended to spend the remainder of her career making the kind of careful choices she'd failed to make that day. Claire read the letter twice and put it in the file drawer where she was keeping documents that deserved to be kept but didn't require a response yet. The federal prosecution took 16 months, not the dramatic compressed timeline of television, 16 actual months of hearings and filings and delays and motions, and the particular grinding patience that federal cases require from everyone attached to them. Claire testified 3 times. She sat in a federal courthouse in downtown Manhattan in a dark suit, and she answered questions clearly and without embellishment, and she looked, when she needed to, at the person asking them and not at Ethan Vale at the defense table. She looked at him once. In the middle of her second testimony, during a break in the questioning when the room was temporarily still and her water glass was being refilled by the court officer. She looked over at the defense table and Ethan was already looking at her, and what was in his face in that unguarded moment was something she hadn't expected. Not hatred, not the cold calculation she'd been prepared for. Something more like a man staring at the specific point where his life had fractured. She looked away first, not because she was uncomfortable, because she'd seen what she needed to see and didn't need more of it. The fraud charges against Ethan Vale resulted in conviction on all counts. The sentence was 22 years. His attorneys appealed on 3 grounds, lost on 2, and the third was still pending when Claire stopped tracking it because she'd decided that tracking it was a way of letting it continue to organize her attention, and she was done with that. Madison Hale pleaded guilty to conspiracy and obstruction charges in exchange for a 5-year sentence in cooperation with the investigation into the corporate officers. She gave her testimony in a voice that was flat and precise, and she answered everything asked of her without volunteering more. Claire didn't attend Madison's proceedings. It wasn't necessary, and what wasn't necessary she'd stopped doing. Senator Callaway's legal proceedings were the most prolonged, as proceedings involving sitting elected officials tend to be. He resigned his seat in the 3rd month of the investigation, which was the politically calculated move that everyone saw coming. He was ultimately convicted of bribery and conspiracy charges and sentenced to 8 years. His attorney immediately announced an appeal. Claire expected the appeal would take years, and she planned to ignore it. The 3 corporate officers received sentences ranging from 4 to 9 years, depending on the depth of their involvement and the quality of their cooperation. The civil recovery process, identifying patient accounts that had been used in the fraud scheme and quantifying the full extraction per account, was ongoing when Claire stopped being professionally involved in it and handed the remaining documentation to the Federal Civil Division. The preliminary estimate of recoverable funds for patient accounts was approximately $180 million. The recovery would be partial. The accounts of many patients had holders who were no longer alive. The money would be divided among surviving account holders and estates according to a formula Claire had helped develop with the Civil Division's attorneys. And then she'd handed it over and let them administer it because she was a nurse, not a lawyer, and she had other things to build. David Bennett's estate was formally cleared of debt, in the 7th month of the federal proceedings, as part of a targeted recovery for accounts identified as specifically targeted through the secondary flagging list. The amount restored was $71,412. Claire received the notification on a Tuesday morning in an email from the Civil Division case coordinator, and she read it sitting at her kitchen table in a new apartment in the West Village, the first apartment that was entirely hers, chosen for reasons that had nothing to do with anyone else's proximity to anything. She sat with the notification for a long time. Then she opened a folder on her laptop that she'd been adding to for several months. Architectural drawings, budget projections, board of directors nominations, a draft mission statement, zoning permits for a building in the Riverdale neighborhood of the Bronx, a former medical clinic space that was large enough and structurally sound enough, and in a neighborhood that needed exactly what she was planning to put in it. Bennett House, a nonprofit rehabilitation and recovery coordination center providing outpatient support for elderly patients navigating complex medical billing and insurance systems, and transition rehabilitation services for patients discharged from long-term care without adequate support structures. She'd been building it alongside the federal proceedings, in the margins of the legal work, in the evenings and on weekends, piece by piece. Her nursing license had been fully reinstated in the 4th month after the licensing board's complaint was formally withdrawn, and the fraudulent records flagged in her file were removed and documented as manufactured. She'd used the intervening months to complete the continuing education credits she'd let lapse during the VenCare years, and she'd done it without haste, without trying to compress the time, letting each course take the space it needed. The executive director position at Bennett House would not be held by Claire Bennett. She'd made that decision early and held to it. She was going to be the director of patient services, hands-on, clinical, in the building 4 days a week. The executive director was a woman named Josephine Parks, 56, who had spent 20 years running nonprofit healthcare organizations in the Bronx, and who had looked at Claire's proposal and said yes within 48 hours because she'd been looking for something like this for a long time. Ruth Bennett was on the founding board of directors. She attended every meeting in person, took careful notes in a small spiral notebook, and asked the most precise questions of anyone at the table. Her memory decline had stabilized somewhat. The neurologist described it as a plateau that might last months or years, and Ruth described it as a state of affairs that she was going to make the most of for exactly as long as it lasted. The day Claire walked through Bennett House's front door for the first time after renovations were complete, her mother was beside her. The space smelled of new paint and the particular clean possibility of an empty room about to become something. Ruth walked through it slowly, touching door frames, looking at windows, reading the small printed sign that would go next to the front desk. Bennett House. Patient Navigation and Rehabilitation Services. Named in honor of David Bennett, who knew when something didn't look right. Ruth stood at the sign for a long moment. Then she put 2 fingers against the lettering and held them there. Claire stood beside her and didn't say anything. After a while, Ruth took her hand away and turned around and looked at the room with the expression of someone who has found the appropriate container for a large and difficult thing. "He would have hated the fuss," Ruth said. "I know," Claire said. "He would have come every day anyway." "I know that too." Ruth picked up her notebook from her purse and made a small notation in it that Claire couldn't read from the angle she was standing at. Then she put the notebook back and straightened her coat and looked at her daughter. "What's next?" she said. Dominic Moretti was sentenced in the 12th month of the proceedings. He had filed a voluntary cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors in the first week of the investigation. Full testimony, complete financial disclosure, active assistance in tracing the shell company network, and the political payment channels. His attorney had negotiated the terms with the federal prosecution team, and Claire had been consulted on none of it, which was how it should have been. She was a witness, not a party to his sentencing considerations. He was convicted of conspiracy to commit wire fraud for his role in VenCare's early structural period. The sentence was 4 years, with credit for cooperation and a recommendation from the prosecution that his full voluntary disclosure and active assistance be formally noted in the record. He did not appeal. He reported to the federal facility in Connecticut, 40 miles from where his criminal history had begun, which Claire thought was the kind of geographic irony that the universe generated without intention, in the 2nd week of the 13th month. Before he went, he came to the West Village apartment. Not announced, He'd called from outside, which she'd appreciated, and she'd come down rather than buzzing him up, which told her something about herself that she filed away without immediate analysis. They stood on the sidewalk in early March, the first genuinely cold morning of what had been an unusually mild winter, and he looked at her with the eyes of someone who had done the accounting on his own life and arrived at a number he wasn't going to argue with. "I'm not asking you to wait," he said. "I want to be specific about that." "I know," she said. "I don't know who I'll be in 4 years. I have theories. I think they're good theories. But I've been wrong about myself before, and I'm trying not to make promises. I'm constructing from hope rather than evidence." She looked at him. She thought about a hotel corridor 10 days after the worst night of her life, a man handing her a business card and telling her the truth when he had every reason not to. She thought about an Astoria apartment and black coffee that was the right temperature, and a man who'd stood outside a Greenpoint warehouse and shook his head once and meant it. She thought about him in the Whitmore Grand's Crystal Ballroom, standing close enough to be present without crowding her decision. She thought about who she'd been when this started and who she was now, and the distance between those two people, which was real and significant and had cost things she wasn't going to pretend hadn't cost anything. 4 years is a long time, she said. Yes. Bennett House opens in 4 months. It's going to take everything I have for at least the first 2 years. I know. And I'm still figuring out. She stopped, tried again. I spent 6 years making my life adjacent to someone else's, and I'm not doing that again. Not for anyone. Whatever comes next for me has to be mine first. That's not something I'd want to change, he said. His voice was quiet and direct and without performance. That's actually the thing I'd least want to change. She looked at him for a long moment, at the face of a man she'd had no reason to trust and had found reasons anyway, carefully, one at a time, the way you build something when you're no longer willing to build it on assumption. Write to me, she said. If you want to. I'll write back. Something moved through his expression. Not relief, not hope exactly, something more grounded than hope. The look of a man who has been given something real and knows the difference between that and what he might have imagined. Okay, he said. She nodded. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he turned and walked to the car that was waiting at the curb. He didn't look back. She'd have thought less of him if he had. She stood on the sidewalk in the cold March morning and watched the car go, and then turned and went back inside to the apartment that was entirely hers. Bennett House opened on a Thursday in June. No gala, no chandelier light, no servers with trays and investors in tailored suits performing ease. There was a table with coffee and pastries that Ruth had insisted on, and there were folding chairs arranged in the lobby for the small ceremony, and there were 37 people who came, staff, board members, several of the patients who'd already enrolled in the navigation program during its soft opening phase, and a woman named Carol from Connecticut who had never quite recovered from the morning a car had arrived at her door, and who had insisted on attending despite the distance. Josephine Parks spoke briefly and well. She had the gift of saying the necessary thing without adding to it, which Claire had come to appreciate more than almost any other quality in a colleague. Claire didn't speak at the ceremony. She'd decided against it and held to that decision when people asked, which they did. She was the director of patient services, and she'd be speaking to patients every day of the week for as long as the building was standing. The ceremony wasn't about her speaking. She stood near the back of the lobby during the remarks and looked at the space. The front desk with its printed sign, the consultation rooms off the central corridor, the rehabilitation equipment in the room at the back that smelled of new rubber and institutional cleaner and possibility. She looked at the people in the folding chairs, faces she was learning, faces she didn't know yet. She looked at her mother in the front row sitting straight, notebook on her knee, pen in her hand. She thought about her father at 63, sitting across a table from a young Ethan Vale and saying the structure doesn't look right. She thought about what it had cost him to be right about that. She thought about the way clarity sometimes goes unpunished, and sometimes costs everything, and how the cost doesn't retroactively make the clarity wrong. She thought about 12 notebooks in a storage unit in Bridgeport, an old woman pressing a small brass key into her palm, the specific weight of evidence that you didn't know you were carrying until it became the most important thing you owned. She thought about a man in a federal facility in Connecticut who was, she was reasonably certain, keeping his theories about himself under careful daily review. After the ceremony, after the coffee, and the conversations, and the moment when the staff moved from ceremonial configuration to working configuration. And the building stopped being an event and started being what it was going to be. Claire went to the consultation room at the end of the hall and sat down at the desk and looked at the empty chair across from her. First patient appointment was in 40 minutes. Eleanor Marsh, 74, referred through the hospital network, presenting with billing irregularities in her long-term care coordination that the hospital's social work team hadn't been able to resolve. Not a Vencare patient, a different network, different company. The same problem in a different coat. Claire picked up the patient file and opened it and read. She was still reading when there was a knock at the door. Her assistant, a young man named Timothy, who had spent 2 years working in a legal aid office and who had exactly the kind of organized patience that this work required. "Mrs. Marsh is a few minutes early," Timothy said. "She's in the lobby with her daughter." "I'll be right out," Claire said. She closed the file and stood up. She straightened her jacket, dark blue today, a color she'd reclaimed deliberately, on her own terms, because no one else's preferences were going to govern what colors she wore in her own building. She looked at the room for a moment, the clean desk, the window with its view of the street, the 2 chairs facing each other with the table between them. Then she walked out to the lobby to meet her patient. In the 16th month, when the last of the federal sentencing proceedings had concluded and the civil recovery program was fully operational under the federal division's management, Claire received a letter. It came in a plain envelope with the institutional return address of the federal facility in Connecticut. The handwriting on the exterior was careful, neither cramped nor sprawling, the handwriting of someone who'd decided that even the exterior of a letter was worth doing correctly. Inside was a single page. She read it standing in the small kitchen of her West Village apartment on a Sunday morning in October, with coffee going and the window open to let in the cool air, the sounds of the street below mixing with the ambient quiet of a weekend morning in a city that never went entirely silent. The letter was not eloquent. It was direct and specific and honest in the way that honest things sometimes are when the person writing them has had a significant amount of time to sit with the gap between what they'd intended and what they'd done. He wrote about the facility, about the work program he was in, about a man in his unit who was teaching him to play chess badly. He wrote about a book he'd read and what it had made him think about. He didn't write about her. He didn't make claims or proposals or ask for anything. He wrote about his days the way someone writes to a person they believe is genuinely interested in their days and leaves the rest of the geometry to develop at its own pace. The last paragraph was brief. It said, "I think about your father sometimes." What he said in that meeting. The way Eleanor wrote it down. He'd seen the whole shape of it in one conversation, just from the numbers and the structure. I think that's probably where you get it from. The ability to look at something complicated and see what's actually there. I thought you should know that I think about that. Claire stood in her kitchen and read the letter twice. Then she folded it and set it on the counter and poured her coffee and stood at the window for a while, looking at the Sunday morning street below, the woman walking her dog, the couple with the double stroller, the old man who sat on the building's front stoop every good weather morning and read a newspaper that he held with both hands. She thought about her father. She thought about the specific way he'd explain things, patient, precise, always starting from first principles, because he believed that first principles were where understanding actually lived. She thought about a 63-year-old man sitting across a table from Ethan Vale and knowing, from the numbers and the structure, that something was wrong. Not because he was suspicious by nature, because he'd spent 40 years teaching young people to look at evidence and trust what it told them. She'd learned that from him. She had. She'd learned to look at what was actually there instead of what she wanted to find, and she'd learned it so thoroughly that she'd kept doing it even when what was actually there was the worst possible version of what she'd hoped. She owed him that recognition, at least. She gave it to him now, standing at the window with her coffee getting cold, in the apartment she'd chosen for herself, above the street she'd come to know as hers. Then she went to her desk and found a piece of paper and sat down. She wrote back. Not much. A page, maybe a little more. She wrote about Bennett House. About Mrs. Marsh, whose billing irregularities had turned out to involve a billing service company with 3 other unresolved complaints, and who had left the first appointment with a clear action plan and had called the following week to say that the company had credited her account in full within 48 hours of receiving Bennett House's formal inquiry letter. She wrote about Timothy, who had taken on the intake coordination with the kind of quiet competence that made you understand why certain people were exactly where they were supposed to be. She wrote about Ruth, who had taken to texting Claire photographs of newspaper articles she thought were relevant to the center's work at all hours, without apparent awareness that 11 p.m. might not be the standard professional communication window. She wrote, "My father used to say that the best thing about teaching was that the students remembered things he'd forgotten he taught them. I think that's probably true of most of the things we pass on. They survive the forgetting." She didn't write about what came next or when or what shape it might take. She didn't need to. Some things were better left in the space between what had happened and what was still becoming, held there with the specific patience of someone who had learned, through the most expensive possible education, that the things worth having were the ones you built from honesty rather than from hope, one careful chosen piece at a time. She sealed the envelope. She wrote the address. She set it on her desk where she would remember to mail it in the morning. Then she picked up her patient file for Monday's first appointment and opened it on the desk beside the letter. And the October light came through the window at the angle that meant late afternoon. And somewhere below on the street, the old man from the stoop went inside, and the city went on doing what it always did, which was to keep moving regardless, indifferent, and alive. And Claire Bennett sat in the middle of it in a life that was entirely